Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of the long and winding Royal Road. My name is W.H. Park, and of course, I am the co-host of the Post Perez podcast over at postwrestling.com. And this is my monthly show looking back at the greatness that is the 1990s era of all Japan Pro Wrestling. And this is episode 8. And I don't know if people remember that I said every fourth episode we will be doing a profile piece on a member of the All Japan roster from that era. And of course, episode 4, I did a profile piece on Mitsuharu Misawa with Hisami, and it was very, very well received. So I thought, okay, well, I have to do number 8. The second profile piece has to be on the man who was Misawa's greatest rival during that time period, the man known as Dangerous K, Toshiaki Kawada. And so today we're going to talk about Toshiaki Kawada. And joining me today to talk about Kawada is an avowed Toshiaki Kawada fan like myself. And I think he's probably one of the biggest pundits and supporters of Kawada in the podcasting world. And that's from the Eastern Lariat, Dylan Fox. Dylan, how are you, sir?
It's so good to be here with you, WH. It's a beautiful Sunday as we record. I feel like there are blessings abound for this day, and we've got some great things to talk about. I was so big of a fan of you and Hisame's show on Misawa. There were so many cool things in there that she had. Obviously, she's like the number one Noah expert, and she was so in tune with Misawa's whole life story. Even the out-of-ring stuff was very interesting. So hopefully I can follow that up really well with Dangerous K. Of everyone, I think it's important to note, and I'm kind of not to jump ahead on everyone, but with all 4 of the 4 Heavenly Kings, the 4 pillars in All Japan, one of my favorite things about them watching is each one of them had their own identity, like right away. Never mind the colors, everybody goes to the colors. But if you look at their story, they're all different. And, the one when you talked about Misawa with Hisame was so beautiful, a lot of the things that she had to say about him. And he had a much different path and a much different story, although very interconnected with Kawada. Out of any of the 2 of the 4 pillars, Kawada and Misawa were definitely the 2 that were most, they resonated with each other the most. With Kawada, it's like you're already, if you say Kawada, you're thinking of Misawa as well, and then vice versa in a lot of ways. So I was really happy to be invited on to do this show specifically. I'll talk about their characters a little bit more going on, but out of everyone's character and their storyline, not necessarily storyline, but even in real life, but their arc in the companies, I think Kawada is the one that represents or resonates with me the most. So I was very happy that you invited me on for this one.
Yeah, I was like thinking, well, who could I have who I have on with me to talk about Kawada, and you're the first person that really came to mind, because I know you always are, bigging up Kawada on the Eastern Lariat or on Twitter. So it's like, oh, Dylan's a natural. So we're going to talk lovingly about Dangerous K here. And, the thing with Kawada is, like, I love all 4 members of the 4 pillars, like Misawa, Kawada, Taue, Kobashi. And, like, if you want to say the ancillary people surrounding them, which would be like Jumbo Tsuruta and Stan Hansen and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Dr. Dusty Williams, Terry Gordy, they're all part of that scene as well, obviously. But like for me, like I will always say, like, Kenta Kobashi is probably my favorite pro wrestler of all time. But Toshiaki Kawada is my favorite 4 pillar. And I say that because, like, I think he's the one of those 4 that stands out the most to me in terms of, like, his stories, because especially in relation to Misawa, because like you're saying, Dylan, like, you talk about Misawa, you think about Kawada. Like, there's no Misawa without Kawada, right? Like, you can say there's no Misawa if it wasn't for the groundwork, the foundation laid by Jumbo Tsuruta. But after Jumbo retires, like, he doesn't have the career that he does without his rivalry and his partnership with Kawada, both like on screen and off screen. And, like, yeah, of course, he would still have the great matches he had with, like, Kobashi and Stan Hansen and Dr. Dusty Williams and all those other people. But, like, he's not going to reach the same levels as he does with, like, Kawada, because of that history that they have, like, professionally, and that history that they have behind the scenes as well. Like, they start off as friends, and then, they become rivals, like legit rivals, vying for the top position in the company, and just bleeds into their matches, as we'll talk about. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but there's a lot of things to unpack with Kawada, and a lot of it has to do with Mitsuharu Misawa. So you're gonna hear his name a lot in this show.
Absolutely. And, Misawa's chosen role, or I mean, I guess chosen not by him, everyone would probably choose this role if they could, but his role in All Japan was as the ace of the company, the main guy, the one who's the champion for the longest, but he couldn't have been there. You can't have that guy without the guys around him, and especially the main rival, pretty much, in Kawada. So he was very important to the role of the ace, even though he didn't have the prolific title reigns that Misawa had in the 90s, but still he was very important to that whole role, and he formed some great partnerships and great rivalries of his own, and he has a great story all his own. But yes, him and Misawa, very, very interconnected from the very beginning as well. So it's like, that's a very interesting little companion piece here. But I will say that if anybody hasn't listened to it, definitely listen to that show, episode 4, and listen to all of them. I've liked every show you've done, not to put you over too much, WH, here, but a lot of the stuff you've been doing with guys like Joey Bay, Davey Portman, Joseph Montecillo, even the original episode. It's like, you've got guys on here that had a lot of fun doing the show with you and had some very informative pieces on matches themselves. And this is a much grander scale than just a single match, obviously, which is why I compare it to the Misawa episode more. But all of your episodes have been very good, and I'm really, really looking forward to this one and getting into his entire career.
Well, let's get into Toshiaki Kawada's life first. He was born December 8th, 1953 in Tochigi. As a child, he did as a child, but more like a teenager, he did amateur wrestling when he was in high school, and he actually became a national champion, Dylan. And in his senior year, he defeated one Kiichi Yamada in the finals to get this national championship. Kiichi Yamada, for those of you who might not know, later became a pro wrestler himself. You might have heard of him. His name is Jushin Thunder Liger.
How crazy is that? That two guys who were national championship level amateur wrestlers ended up becoming legends in the pro style. He had a little bit of other sports background, playing some baseball. He was in sumo club in middle school as well. A funny tidbit I saw said about him is that he was actually the same height as he was in high school as he was in All Japan. Like, he had a very early growth spurt, so he had a great size advantage, and obviously used that to great skill, being the champion, beating the future Jushin Thunder Liger in a match there. And it was just so crazy that you have all of these. You had other guys around that time too. Obviously, the aforementioned Misawa, that's very well known. There's this guy, Super Rider, that was also in his team. He was at Social Progressive Wrestling Federation. I know you remember that, WH, back from the Super J Cup '95, that legendary company.
Oh, if I was starting a wrestling company, then I would definitely call my wrestling company, Super Progressive Wrestling.
Yes, but see, all of those influences all together at one, like the two of the four pillars, Jushin Liger and a Kamen Rider cosplayer gimmick from Social Progressive Wrestling Federation, all in the same atmosphere.
There's something in the water. Obviously, there's something happening in the water in Japan at that time to produce all this greatness. So one thing we have to mention with Kawada in his high school days is he attended a place called Ashikaga University High School. And it's important because this is where he meets Mitsuharu Misawa, because Mitsuharu Misawa also went to this high school. And Misawa was a year ahead of Kawada, so he was a senpai, as they say in Japanese, which I feel, Dylan, like Misawa being a year ahead of Kawada in high school is kind of a perfect metaphor for like their professional relationship years down the line.
It really is, isn't it? It's because it's kind of like, especially in Japan, the senpai relationship is so stringent. It's so strongly ingrained with people. So it's always kind of like, even just that 1 year difference, right from the beginning, it felt like Kawada was kind of secondary to Misawa, even then. But still, if you look at their career, they obviously rose up later on to be more similar. But even at Kawada's peak, even at his entire peak of his career, it always felt like he was kind of in that shadow of Misawa.
So one thing that's really interesting at this time is that Kawada actually tests and goes to try out for the New Japan Pro Wrestling Dojo, and he gets accepted. He passes the dojo exam, and he wanted to join that dojo and he wanted to become part of New Japan Pro Wrestling. But his mother said it'd be better if you finish high school first, do that first, and then go. So he was able to defer his enrollment in the New Japan dojo. But in that time that he was going to finish high school, Misawa came to him and convinced him to join the All Japan dojo. And I think one of the selling points Misawa gave to Kawada, even though he's accepted into like one of the biggest companies in Japan at the time, like it's New Japan and it's All Japan, really, right? Is that Misawa was really selling the idea like listen, this All Japan dojo, it's like a family. Like I feel like this is the first place I ever belonged. I think mainly because Misawa had a terrible relationship with his father, and so he found all these father figures in All Japan, and then he wanted to like kind of share that feeling with this guy Kawada, who's like his one of his best friends in high school. So it must have been a hell of a pitch because like Kawada would have to like try out all over again to get into the All Japan dojo, and of course because we all know the story here that he passes that, and he got into the All Japan dojo, and the rest is history. But it'd be kind of interesting because, like, if he went into the New Japan dojo, Dylan, who would his classmates have been? Would it have been like Liger and like Budo and Chono and Hashimoto?
That's interesting. What year was this around that he traveled? Do you know the specific year he trained at the dojo, or he passed the test for a dojo?
I don't know. I think it's probably like 79, between 79 and 81 is like would be his tenure, like joining the dojo and passing the test and things like that.
Yeah. See, it depends on what year he would be in, but he would be around there. He might be a little younger than some of those guys, or a little older rather than some of those guys. He might debut a little bit sooner. He might be, he would have been a young guy around the time. If he had went to New Japan instead, he would have been like a young lion around the time of the, guys like Akira Maeda were there and stuff. I think he might have been in like 84, 85, before the UWF split, the original feud between UWF and New Japan back in the 80s. He might have been involved in that. He probably would have been fit in really well with that, actually, if that had happened. The crazy thing is, but it's interesting when you talk about the family atmosphere, because that was something that honestly was one of the most eye-opening parts of your show with Hisame, is when y'all talked about Misawa's upbringing, because that really resonated with me, because when I was younger I had a lot of those same feelings that she was talking about with Misawa, a crazy upbringing, like a messed up home and all of that stuff, and wanted to be a wrestler to be able to stand up for yourself later on. It's like I totally resonated with that. That's very similar to me, and I never even thought about that until it was discussed in depth. Kawada's story was not, his family was much less dysfunctional, obviously. You just mentioned it. Like, his mom had a good head on her shoulders to try and, steer him not away from wrestling, but to at least graduate and do good things then, even though I'm sure he would have loved to have had a run there. And it changed his whole life for the better, because as you said, Misawa helped recruit him there. But him in New Japan would have been very interesting, because he came at a time that would have been perfect for him stylistically, and obviously he would have ended up facing Hashimoto and such later on. But I think he was a little bit older than the Three Musketeers generation. But he would have been around then, at the very least. So that would have been really good if they could have done that. Like you said, Kawada a year younger than Misawa, and I think that helped him. Misawa's guidance in that time helped him in a great way, and I'm sure that he doesn't regret it. Let's just say that. I'm sure that he's very happy with how it worked out.
Yeah, I can't think like that he would have found success in New Japan as well. But like we said at the top of the show, like a lot of his career and a lot of like the success he has is tied in with his relationship with Misawa, both like as partners and later as rivals in the ring. Moving back to Kawada by himself, though, so he debuts on October 4th, 1982, and he loses his first match to his future tag team partner, one Hiromichi Fuyuki, who would later change his name to Samson Fuyuki, and they would form a tag team called Footloose, and we'll get to Footloose a little bit later on in the show. But I think it's really cool that he has this relationship right off professionally with Fuyuki.
Yeah, absolutely. And Fuyuki would become a big player behind the scenes, like much later on in FMW, even. And even back then, like you said, this was the early days for him, and it's just a cool little thing there to have that future partner and somebody that would be able to, not, if not in the ring, but also backstage, be able to help him. And like you said, we'll get to the tag team a little bit later on. But Kawada coming into the All Japan world, he was somebody that was just like kind of Kobashi, much like a lot of Japanese wrestlers at the time, and especially in All Japan. And that is to say, he lost a lot very, very earlier on. I know this is not surprising to anyone, but if you look at his record, he had a ton of matches. Like Kobashi is much more known for this as losing, a million matches in a row and finally overcoming it. But Kawada lost a ton of matches to start off, like over 200. It's listed as. So that just goes to show you, to be in All Japan in the 80s, I mean, you had to have a lot of determination to put and a good humbling experience to put everyone over at the time.
Well, his first recorded win is on April 27th, 1983, but this is in a 10-man battle royal, which, like looking at his match listings on Cage Match, these are something actually he ends up having a lot of success in, because he wins a lot of these 10-man battle royals during his first year as a professional wrestler. And he doesn't get his first singles win, his proper first singles win, until January 14th, 1984, against one Tarzan Goto. And here's another person who would later become quite a name in FMW later on.
Lots of FMW references right now, but those are the guys they had around, in All Japan. It's funny because a lot of the FMW guys were just, I don't want to say failed, but pretty much guys who were in All Japan, and they got rid of them for whatever reason. And yeah, Kawada beating Tarzan Goto. That's a very interesting tidbit, considering where Goto would go on to become in the FMW world. But yes, like you said, that's a 2 or 3 year period of him doing nothing but losing to build himself up. And obviously that would set the stage for his excursion. And it's crazy that you see something like that, and at the time, him and Misawa's careers were already starting to kind of intersect when you look at their paths and how they would go in different ways, different routes.
Well, I mean, one thing we should note is that like he starts getting wins. He starts trading victories, like back and forth with Samson Fuyuki in '84. And this is also the time where he sporadically starts teaming with Tiger Mask. The Mitsuharu Misawa version of Tiger Mask is happening in '84 as well. But it's in '85 that that's the next phase of his career. He goes on excursion to North America with Fuyuki as his tag team partner. And at first, they show up in Texas, in Southwest Championship Wrestling, which is the promotion run by Joe Blanchard, and him and Fuyuki formed a tag team. Dylan, you won't believe the incredibly imaginative, creative tag team name that they were given. They were called Japanese Force.
Amazing, right? What a great inventive team name, and even better is the team that they were feuding with at the time as well. And I mean, this was a historical rivalry at the time. I think we could agree. I mean, who better to face the Japanese Force than the American Force?
Yes, the American Force of Paul Diamond and Shawn Michaels. What a combo that is.
I mean, and think about this. This is something that Kawada can always say he had over Misawa, that he has a pinfall victory over Shawn Michaels in a tag match, and Misawa never did that. So with that in his arsenal, that could have been the one that made him a legend.
Like, forget, the Midnight Rockers versus Doug Summers and Buddy Rose. This was probably the series of matches that made Shawn Michaels a great wrestler, right? Feuding with Samson Fuyuki and then Toshiaki Kawada, Japanese Force.
Yes, the legendary team of Japanese Force. I think everyone knows them and remembers their amazing run at the time. And, in all seriousness, though, this was the start of a kind of crazy time period, because this is something interesting too about Kawada, that if you notice, it's like, okay, Misawa did have his little excursion to Mexico, but remember that he got called back to be Tiger Mask. So his excursion wasn't as traditional as some of the other ones. And Taue and Kobashi didn't have an excursion really, because they were at the time, not to jump ahead, but they were at a time where that really wasn't possible. So Kawada was the only one of the four pillars that had a true excursion to a foreign land, and two in America and Canada. So I think that's very interesting that he had the biggest grind out of all of them, because they didn't have to go through this bullcrap that he went through in Japanese force and everything like that. And especially the 80s, you got to remember the wrestling scene in the 80s was so, like, especially towards Asians at the time, it's pretty much everyone was some sort of stereotype of any ethnicity, really. If you were from the South, you were a cowboy. If you were an Asian, you were a karate master or some bullcrap like that. It's like that's how they kind of worked in the 80s in America and North America. So he was here playing this kind of goofy Japanese force character with his tag team partner. And it was a really tough time for Kawada in America. A lot of these guys were probably not too friendly. In his book he wrote, Kawada has this autobiography, and some of a little bit has been translated of it. And basically, he doesn't speak too glowingly about his time here, and they were not too kind to the Japanese talent at that time.
No, I can't imagine that they were. I mean, it's the 80s. Like, Jiganism in wrestling is like at its all-time high, I think. So, but like Kawada, finishes up in Texas, and then in '86 he would travel to Canada. He would specifically go to Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and work for Stu Hart in Stampede Wrestling. And then it's in Stampede that he gets this gimmick, a pink mask, as you were saying to me, Dylan. You were watching a match with Kawada under a pink mask as the legendary Black Mephisto.
Yeah, yeah. So a wonderful gimmick at the time. And when I heard this name, I mean, when you hear that name, you expect like, I was kind of expecting like a gothic, all black guy, pretty much like black mask, black tights. Maybe he came out with a cape or something like that. That sounds like a horror movie villain of like the 1930s to me. Like, he was like Dracula's rival or something when I hear that. But then you watch him come out, and it's like he has this pink mask on. He comes out in red pants with a white stripe. Not that dissimilar to the stuff he wore later on, especially like his hustle pants, like when he had the full pants with the black and yellow. This is what he had with but it was red and white, and he had a pink mask on. And there are a few matches online. They're pretty rare, but you can find them if you look them up. I was watching him versus this guy Robbie Stewart, a Scottish wrestler that they had in Calgary at the time, and watching him was so interesting. And this whole time period was really miserable for him, actually, in Canada, because he was working on and off. But if you watch him wrestle, and this is kind of noted, in Tom Zenk's book, he wrote a whole, not a chapter, but a long little tirade about Kawada. And basically, he was talking about him. It's like he could do stuff that you would never expect him. He was walking the ropes. Even in the matches I saw, he was doing, the Daniel Bryan, Jackie Chan move where he flipped from the corner. Kawada was doing that in 1985, and doing planchas on the outside, walking the ropes. He was doing some stuff that you wouldn't expect from Toshiaki Kawada, and obviously stuff he wouldn't use as a heavyweight. But he was much lighter at this point as well. Even when they were in school, he was actually lighter. Like, a lot of people don't know this. He was much lighter than Misawa in their amateur wrestling weight class. So he was still doing a lot of stuff that you wouldn't expect from him as Black Mephisto. And I'm sure in all of his other assorted gimmicks that they gave him. But yeah, it was a very interesting time, and he was really unhappy at this time. But he would have a little bit, things would turn up a little bit in Montreal for him when he left Calgary.
Well, I mean, Black Mephisto is like obviously a name that's now associated with one Taichi Ishikari, now known as just Taichi. And I just wrote in my notes, Taichi stealing the Black Mephisto name along with everything else from Kawada.
Yeah, yes, his future student Taichi Kawada taught him everything he knows, and Taichi, I don't know how much he paid attention in his classes, but yes, he did steal. He named his finishing move, which was like the air raid crash. He called it the Black Mephisto in tribute to his trainer Toshiaki Kawada.
Yeah, so he wouldn't keep this Black Mephisto character for forever during his time in Canada. He would later evolve into the Korean pro wrestler Kyo Kawada, which I don't think is a Korean name. This still looks like a Japanese name. So I don't know why people are referring to this as a Korean gimmick. It doesn't sound like a Korean name, and I would know because I'm actually Korean. But anyways, he wraps up his excursion. He leaves Calgary. He leaves Stampede Wrestling. He moves over to Kickback, and he works
not to interrupt you a little bit on that Montreal, but he had another name too in Montreal because yes, Kyo Kawada, he was announced as being from Seoul, South Korea, and like you said, nothing about him is remotely Korean, even his name. But he also had another name. He was called Mr. Toshiaki in Montreal as well. That was another of his gimmicks that they had. And at this time, he actually got to, he hung out, as Zink mentioned in his book, with him and also Rick Martel as well. And Kawada was actually quite friendly and hung out with Rick and his wife in Montreal. Obviously, Martel like ran Montreal pretty much at the time. He was like the star guy from there. And Kawada was friendly with them. But other than that, he was a guy that was struggling hard, in Montreal because let's just be honest. Kyo Kawada and Mr. Toshiaki are not main event gimmicks, to say the least. So he wasn't really being able to even be booked that much. So this guy was stuck in Canada, and it wasn't like Misawa where he got, and I'm sure this is where a lot of his resentment came from later on. Like you could probably trace it back to this excursion because remember, Misawa got called back early to be Tiger Mask. Kawada was stuck for years in Canada, like a couple of years, basically being miserable and doing nothing, not knowing anybody, probably getting mistreated by a lot of the North American wrestlers. Although he, like I said, he had a few allies with Zink and Martel, and even in Zink's book, he kind of he talks about him a lot. Zink's a really interesting character if you know anything about him, but he's putting him over, but then even he admits like basically he ditched him in Canada. So it's like he really wasn't able to have that full life. And at that point, this is where a lot of his resentment went to Misawa as well, because this is something that was mentioned that Kawada, and I think a lot of wrestlers at this time in the 80s as well, but he is a very noted example of it. He was really into the body, like that was a huge thing for him at the time. And his body was not a bodybuilder level, so you go to America and Canada especially, and you're seeing a bunch of these jacked up guys with super muscular bodies, and that was where Kawada actually tried steroids for the first time. But Zink, according to him, he basically says that it was very brief. It was only a few weeks that he tried it. And a very funny story, Kawada, the reason why he was very skeptical and not wanting to try them was because of the side effects on his nether regions, pretty much. Which, again, I can relate to as well, because I had a very similar situation. That was my main question as well when I was younger. And Kawada had those same thoughts as well. So that's what got him off of it, because he was worried about the side effects of steroids. But he really wanted that body. And that's a lot of where his resentment came, where he was like, oh, you look at Misawa, oh, you're so lucky. Why do you have this great body and these great looks? And I don't have that. So that was something that really burned in his mind, was just the look of things, never mind wrestling skill or anything like that. Just the look of things, and you see all these jacked up guys, and then you go back home and Misawa was like the super popular, handsome guy, obviously was going to be the ace. And I think it was really disheartening for him that he felt he was not as handsome as Misawa and not as good of a body. And that's why maybe he thought that Baba liked him better. But even then, it's like they put him under a mask, so it didn't even matter that it was handsome. So that kind of made him even more frustrated at the time. There were lots of things around this era for Kawada that were so interesting and really shaped his whole outlook on a lot of things going forward.
Yeah, so before 1986 ends, like thankfully for Kawada, he is able to get called back to Japan. He doesn't have to work in Canada anymore. Doesn't have to work for the Rougeaus in Montreal or for the Hearts in Calgary anymore. He can go back to Japan. And one of these things, one thing we have to mention that's really important, like about we're talking about the resentment that Kawada feels towards Misawa and like kind of the roots of their rivalry. It's also rooted in like who their mentors were in All Japan. So like at some point in Kawada's early career, he is placed under the tutelage of one Genichiro Tenryu, and Misawa subsequently is placed under the tutelage of one Jumbo Tsuruta. And for those of you who don't know, Jumbo Tsuruta and Genichiro Tenryu were rivals in All Japan Pro Wrestling. They were basically Misawa and Kawada of the 80s. And so like for these guys who were friends to be placed under different mentors was really significant, I feel. And I think it kind of plays into their on-screen personas, and it plays into like maybe the fans' minds of how they perceive Misawa and Kawada, because like they're the direct descendants of the wrestling lineage of both Jumbo Tsuruta and Genichiro Tenryu.
Absolutely. I like that's a great little part to their story as well. That's not really as recognized as much by a lot of the fans. I think it's because a lot of the fans, especially the Western fans of All Japan at that time, they jumped in with the four pillars. So they might have just missed that Tenryu and Jumbo feud, a lot of guys. But I really, really have to push everybody listening to this. If you've never seen the Jumbo and Tenryu feud, that is so good. Like it was vital to making the four pillars what they were, because the style of All Japan before then, you had a lot of DQ finishes, a lot of cheesy stuff, and like great wrestling, don't get me wrong, but a lot of stuff was slower paced, more realistic and methodical. And with Jumbo and Tenryu, they were like their rivalry, specifically their matches, were like they bridged the gap between the old way and the four pillars way that was to come afterwards. And they both deserve a lot of credit, Jumbo and Tenryu. And like you said, obviously Misawa would align with Jumbo at the time, and Tenryu would be having Kawada as his understudy. So that makes them, that's like another page to their rivalry, especially in the ring. That's something that you could always point to, that they were like the next generation, like you said, of Jumbo and Tenryu, and they helped bridge that gap for the fans as well, not just stylistically, but for the fans of that era. So I think that's really interesting how that all plays together. That's something that would be really hard to replicate today, I feel like, with somebody. It's like 20 years from now or 10 years from now or whatever, it's going to be really hard for Kento Miyahara or somebody in All Japan. Obviously, times have changed and the company's changed so drastically in these last 30 years. But that's something that you wouldn't really be able to see today. Kento Miyahara and somebody would be his rival, and they would have underlings that would follow in their footsteps. Like, to have it to this level would be so difficult, because it was so meaningful to the fans, especially.
Well, I mean, like the thing with Tenryu and Kawada is that like Tenryu would form a group called the Revolution in All Japan Pro Wrestling, and Kawada would be a part of this. He would be kind of the one of the young boys, because like Samson Fuyuki would later on, around in late '87, he changes his name from Hiromichi to Samson, and he joins Revolution as well, and they become like the junior heavyweight tag team champions, or tag team of the group. Like, so its main members are Tenryu and his partner Asahara Hara. They're like the big heavyweight members of the group, and Hara is Tenryu's tag team partner. But Fuyuki and Kawada, they reformed Japanese Force, but under a much better name this time. Dylan, they're called Footloose, and they're kind of like I think Baba's kind of like vision of like the kind of like high flying tag teams that he would see come from America, like the Rock and Roll Express and the Fantastics. He wanted something like that, so he put Kawada and Fuyuki together as Footloose. And if you're only familiar with Fuyuki, like in his FMW days, you'd be like, Fuyuki was a high flyer. Yes, he was. He is much smaller in his early All Japan days, actually. So, but the thing is like, Tenryu is such an important influence on both like Kawada and Fuyuki, like to the point where like Fuyuki at some point he leaves All Japan to join Tenryu when Tenryu forms his own promotion. So like there's this like visual connection also between like Kawada and Tenryu, because like at some point Kawada adopts the colors of Tenryu, the colors of Revolution. He wears black and yellow, and like for the longest time he just had the most horrible gear. Like he would wear these god awful like zebra print fucking pants with Fuyuki and Footloose, and like variations of that for up until like I say like maybe 91, 92, when he finally gets into the black and the yellow. But these are the colors of Revolution. These are the colors of Genichiro Tenryu.
Oh yeah, the Footloose gear for Kawada was horrible. There's no question about that. He made a huge step up when he went to the Revolution kind of gear. He had the leopard print tattoo as well. It was just terrible gear. But they were a very energetic tag team, and they had some great matches. Again, this is kind of like a footnote in his career, because he went on to do so many great things. But if you've never seen any of Footloose as a team, they're an amazing team together. They actually have a lot of really great matches. And that name was a pun on their time in America teaming as Japanese force, because that was kind of like a reverse, because it's like everyone expects them to be, Asian stereotypes. So instead they had this super American style name with Footloose, a very famous movie, obviously. And so they used that as their name in Japan. So it was kind of like a reverse of their Japanese force name in Japan to use the American style name. But as workers, they were really, really good together. And Kawada, especially, he was very energetic at this time, still young, at this point. Not the Kawada we would know with everything, but still, he showed flashes of that, and they had a lot of great matches. So I really have to put over Footloose as a team. They're underrated historically, and that was a very influential time in Kawada's career. Even after Tenryu retired and stuff, Kawada still spoke highly of Tenryu, and they've remained friends ever since. So, that's a really good stuff between those guys. They were both. Kawada really appreciated Tenryu's guidance at that time.
Yeah, so one thing I want to mention with Footloose is that, like you're saying, Dylan, they had like a really great run as a tag team. This included like kind of an on and off relationship with the All Asia Tag Team titles, and they would feud with a lot of teams, a lot of makeshift teams from the Japanese roster, but also like some established American teams, including the Rock and Roll Express, and also they would be part of like kind of the early development of Doug Furness and Dan Crawford as the Can-Am Express before they kind of take over that role of being the kind of undercard, tag team champions who are having like these awesome work rate matches. Before the Can-Am Express, that was kind of like that space was kind of occupied by Footloose, and I just think it's a nice little footnote. Like if you want to get a complete like image of or reckoning of Kawada's career, you have to include this tag team that he has with Fuyuki and like all the amazing like matches he has holding the All Asia Tag Team titles.
Absolutely. It's really great wrestling too. If you want to go back and watch it, I think you'll be really impressed. And like I said, it's a different look at Kawada because he's so young. He's wearing these horrible this horrible attire that you can see him in. And I also think that Revolution as a group was so well done. You have Tenryu and Hara as the team. You have Footloose as kind of the secondary tag champions. You have Yoshinari Ogawa still wrestling in Pro Wrestling Noah to this day. He was in Revolution as well, and he was kind of like their junior member at the time. So they all had different roles there, like all the members of Revolution. So I thought that was really good that they did that, and also worth noting to kind of bring in the Tenryu and Jumbo and the Kawada Misawa comparison. That started after, because originally Jumbo and Tenryu were a team, and then they split off and became rivals, much like Kawada and Misawa would as well. So I do think that's worth mentioning as well.
Definitely. In 1988, a significant occurrence happens. Like Tenryu's regular partner that we talked about, Asahara Hara, he is fired from All Japan Pro Wrestling because of his I suppose, out of control gambling habits. And so, he's out of the Real World Tag League as Tenryu's partner, and so they need a replacement. So they put Kawada as Tenryu's tag team partner in that year's Real World Tag League, and they make it to the finals. And they have an awesome finals match against the team of Stan Hansen and Terry Gordy. And if you want to see kind of a masterclass on how to get sympathy, a masterclass of selling, you have to watch this match. Like Hansen and Gordy basically decimate Kawada in this match to the point where like him just like, getting back onto the apron, like pops the crowd. Like Kawada selling in this match is just on another level. Like the way you as a viewer, as a fan, get sucked into his story, like of his struggle to like just help his mentor and his partner against these two big bruising like American wrestlers in Japan is it's just astounding. Definitely one of those matches that I'm gonna say go watch if you want to get like something. What is so great about Kawada? This is one of those matches that's going to show you what's so great about Toshiaki Kawada.
And that's a really, really important part of his entire career. Like that would be a recurring theme for Kawada as a pro wrestler. Because everybody knows him as Dangerous K, the guy who kicks ass, he kicks people to hell, he power bombs people, drops them on their head. Everybody knows that guy, But what really made Kawada an all-time great worker was his ability to work from under and sell. And that's something like Stan Hansen, I think this applies to as well, that they're both very underrated as working from under, just because their offensive game was so awesome. But if you watch Kawada in these matches, a big theme of nearly all of his greatest matches are him working from under and selling and being able to get the crowd so into it. And like you said, he was, just firing off. And the spots in that match, too, when he was teaming with Tenryu versus Hansen and Gordy, the spots where he would fire up and throw his spin kicks, like one of his most traditional moves, that was so well timed, so awesome that I loved that match. It was so good, and Kawada was so great in it as well. Even as the young guy, I thought it was great. And Hansen in that match, just a great rivalry for Kawada already. Like the first part of it, and Kawada's role as kind of like a fearless rookie, but also a guy with a lot of heart. He sold that so well, and I just, like you said, that was a great match.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention, in relation to Kawada's selling is that I think there's two people in 90s Japanese wrestling that I think are on just a completely different level with their selling, and that's mainly because of their facial expressions. Like they have the best, most compelling facial expressions in wrestling, and that's Toshiaki Kawada is one of them. The other person is Shinjiro Otani, and I would challenge anyone who follows wrestling really closely to tell me who's better than either of these two at selling with their faces, because it's unbelievable, like how much story is being told, how much emotion is being sold to you by these guys just from the expression on their faces, whether it's pain, frustration, like anger, or like just utter despair at not being able to win their match. Is just on a different level. Like Kenta Kobashi is an amazing seller. I think Misawa has his legendary stoicism, which kind of I don't rate his selling as high as like Kobashi. Certainly not the same level as Kawada. And Taiwei's a good seller. He's not on that level either. Like there's very, very few people within All Japan or even in New Japan at the time that are on the same level as Toshiaki Kawada.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kobashi was more expressive, more outwardly, physically charismatic, but Kawada had a grasp of the little things, in a way. So
I think it was timing too. Like
yeah.
he like was very economical with when he was going to use these facial expressions as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, he had a lot of stuff that the nuts and bolts of it, Kawada, I think, was the best of the four at. But that's a grand scheme of things sort of point, and I loved everything about that. I do think too, it's worth noting at this time, it's something that we have to say about all of these guys and cannot be overlooked in any of the four pillars. Anybody you have on after me, or Hisame show. Baba's booking was instrumental to all of these guys, and it was so smart, like so well done throughout the years. Even here in the 80s, I mean, they had this match here, which was a classic match. Like this was one of the best tag matches of the 80s, in my opinion. Tenryu Kawada versus Hansen and Gordy, but this was set up, especially Kawada himself, like his role was very integral, and it was set up in the match that was prior to this. They had a match with Jumbo Tsuruta and Yoshiaki Yatsu that set up the injury for Kawada that he was selling from that match. And obviously, I'm sure the heat between Tenryu and Jumbo. It was a very violent match, to say the least. It wasn't as good as this one with Hansen and Gordy, but it set up this match. So it's like from match to match booking, week to week booking, it was so strong. Like everything was so intricately put together by Baba that I think that played a huge role in everybody's success. But even back in 1988, before he was the Kawada we would know, he still had all of that going for him.
Yeah, so from here we go into 1989, and Kawada basically spends 89 as the regular partner of either Tenryu or Fuyuki, and like I said, Footloose, they have a nice relationship with the All Asia Tag Team titles. They would win those titles 3 times, while having feuds with a bunch of people, including, like I said, Doug Furnace and Dan Crawford, the Can-Am Express. But it's in 1990 that something seismic happens. Genichiro Tenryu, he leaves All Japan Pro Wrestling, and and later on in around July of that year, Fuyuki would also leave All Japan to go join Tenryu in his new Super World Sports promotion. So that the question is, Dylan, what happens with Toshiaki Kawada? Where does Kawada go? Like, there's no members of Revolution left. Footloose is done. So what happens with Kawada? So the answer is that Baba puts him with his like his rival kind of at that time. It's Tiger Mask. Mitsuharu Misawa's Tiger Mask, and so he says, okay, you know what? We got to give Kawada something to do. We're gonna make him Misawa's tag team partner, and it's in this role that like Kawada is actually a big part of Misawa's story because on May 14th in a tag match, Kawada and Tiger Mask have against Fuyuki and who was the other person in that match? I can't remember, but anyways, you're gonna remember, Dylan. May 14th, at some point, Tiger Mask beckons to Kawada, "Hey, untie this thing on my head." So Kawada goes over, and in a very, very legendary scene, he helps untie the mask of Tiger Mask of Mitsuharu Misawa, and then Misawa rips it off, throws it into the crowd, and the crowd starts chanting Misawa, 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 and it's the start of the rise of Mitsuharu Misawa in All Japan Pro Wrestling, and Kawada is a symbolic part of that as well.
Yeah, and it's crazy how that would happen. Also, at this point, Kawada was in the blue and white version of his attire. So yeah, they had a match with Fuyuki and Yatsu. And at the end of it, he threw the mask away, like you said, and Kawada was actually the one that helped take it off of him, which is a great, like, again, a little point of their career, but so emblematic of their entire story together. It's like Misawa got this huge reaction from the crowd, and Kawada was right there helping take the mask off of him. So it was a nice little thing that you could look at, and you could see that was a big part of their story. And obviously, that moment changed wrestling history for All Japan specifically, but really all of Japanese wrestling. Baba taking the mask off of Misawa changed everything and really elevated everybody. And by the end of it, obviously, the main thing was Misawa at the time, but that set up what was to come.
Well, this is really that match is really the seeds of what we would later get to know as the Super Generation Army. So the Super Generation Army is a unit based around Misawa and Kawada as the main guys, and joining them are Kenta Kobashi, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, and a young Akira Taue as well. This is before I think Yoshiaki Yatsu is still in All Japan, so he's still the regular tag partner of Jumbo Tsuruta. So, but at some point Yatsu leaves as well. He leaves All Japan to go join Tenryu, and so Jumbo needs a tag team partner. So Baba decides it's going to be Taue, and another great decision because as much as I love the Olympics, the team of Jumbo Tsuruta and Yoshiaki Yatsu, I think an equally great team is the team of Jumbo Tsuruta and Akira Taue. And this is just brilliant booking in my part because now Taue is on the other side. He's in Tsuruta, and we have the Super Generation Army. It's 4 guys, and you have Misawa, Kawada, Kobashi, and Kikuchi in Super Generation Army, and then in Tsuruta is Jumbo, Taue. It's Masabu Fuchi, and Yoshinari Agawa. Yoshinari Agawa would move from Revolution and join Tsuruta as well later on as one of their junior guys. And he would be kind of placed in there with Kikuchi in the junior heavyweight title scene. But it's this feud. Everyone talks about Misawa and Jumbo. And yes, of course, that is so important to the success of All Japan Pro Wrestling. But I think even more important is the overall feud of the units of Super Generation Army versus Tsuruta, Dylan.
Absolutely. That really shaped the history of All Japan going forward. It was so important, especially after Jumbo's unfortunate sickness that he had. That set up that planted the seeds for everybody to be in their roles that they would have pretty much this feud. And it was great to put Taue away, move Taue away from the Super Generation Army to be under Jumbo and give them that guy. The dynamics were a lot different with Jumbo and Yatsu, with Jumbo and Taue, because Taue was obviously the junior member. And that gave him a lot of great heat too, because it was kind of like, to the fans, he was the one that turned on the young guys, the other Super Generation Army guys. So that kind of made him seem like a traitor, pretty much at the time. And it was crazy how that happened because, in theory, you could have seen when Tenryu left, who knows what could have happened if Kawada had left with him with SWS, which was ill-fated, to say the least. But that obviously didn't happen for whatever reason. I'm sure Kawada would have stayed anyway. I think he had an interview one time where they asked him about that, and he was like, "I never knew about it," because it had been for a long time. A lot of people had thought that Tenryu had asked him to come too, but he was like, "I never knew anything about that, but I would have stayed anyway." It was basically his reaction, and I think that's pretty much true. To bring him into the Super Generation Army added so many great multi-man tag matches, with not just Misawa and Jumbo, but like you said, all of the side characters. Kawada, Kobashi was in his role. At this point, Kobashi was younger than Kawada and Misawa, so he was still not at that level yet. Taue as well was closer to Kobashi than Kawada, although that would change quickly, obviously. Kikuchi was a huge part of those matches. Fuchi as well. The junior members played a great role in those matches too. I thought Jumbo was an expert at making everybody rise above where they were and get the absolute best out of them, whether it was Misawa or Kawada. Like everybody talks about Misawa, but Jumbo versus Kawada had multiple great matches and standoffs in multi-man matches, but also in singles matches as well. So you can't underrate the feud between Kawada and Jumbo as well at the same time.
I mean, if you look at Jumbo's relationship with each of the four pillars, right? Or with each of the members of the Super Generation Army, is more accurately what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Is like he obviously has that that intense rivalry with Misawa, like because like Misawa is gonna replace him as the ace, and like he's holding on to his throne. And this like young upstart, he's gonna take his kingdom away from him, and he wants to keep it away from him. So that's the base of their relationship. With Kobashi, it's like Jumbo is like this mountain for Kobashi that he has to overcome to reach like the potential that he has as a professional wrestler. And so that's kind of like forms like the basis of their interactions and matches. To me, though, like the most interesting, and with Kikuchi, I shouldn't overlook Kikuchi. Jumbo just like to beat the fucking shit out of Kikuchi. That's really the basis of their interactions in matches. But with Kawada, I feel like Kawada and Jumbo had just this really unique chemistry as well, unique dynamic in that, this is where I think like the relationship that, Kawada had with Tenryu plays an important part is that, Jumbo basically transfers like his feelings towards Tenryu, whether they're kayfabe or shoot feelings, I'm not exactly sure, but he transfers them to Kawada because he sees Kawada wearing the colors of Tenryu and he thinks, I hate you and I'm gonna beat the fucking shit out of you, and you're aligned with this guy who's trying to take my spot and you're helping him. So they have a very different dynamic, like Kawada and Jumbo do in their matches than than the Misawa and Jumbo do. I think really what they should do is people should watch one of those early singles matches between Misawa and Jumbo, and then go watch a singles match that Jumbo would have with Kawada in around the 92, 93 era. And it's really, really interesting to see how Jumbo works these matches very differently from one another.
Yeah, 91 would be, by 92, Jumbo was already getting sick by a midpoint. So, right. Yeah, they had 91, 92. I had a great match in October 91. I think that was Kawada's first ever Triple Crown match, was him versus Jumbo in October of 1991. Great match, too. That was, on my Patreon for Eastern Lariat, I do this 90s project show where I go over the top 50 matches of each year of the 90s, and that was a top 15 match that year. Kawada and Jumbo. Even in 91, like I said, Kawada's still not, like, he's just becoming Dangerous K that we would know. Like he had just gotten the black and yellow tights at that time. More known as a tag team worker, really, at that point. Like you said, he was doing the multi-mans, but also as the sidekick to Misawa at the time. So it's like, at that era, that was a really interesting era for Kawada, because Misawa was only 1 year older than him, but he was placed spot above him on the card. So it was very interesting on that level too. But like you said, Jumbo, in long story short, basically for what you were trying to say is whenever Jumbo sees anybody, he just wants to beat the shit out of them in All Japan. That's like his story. It feels like anybody from Super Generation Army specifically. And Fuchi was great in that feud too, as like a giant prick heel that they had there, especially against Kikuchi. Kikuchi is like awesome in his role. Kobashi awesome in his role. Obviously, they were a tag team, and that kind of mirrored the relationship of Revolution. Except Kawada was a step up. Instead of being like Kobashi and Kikuchi were kind of like the footloose role, and Kawada was Misawa's second, similar to Hara, although he didn't have as many gambling depths as Hara. So that is the main difference there. But he was kind of making a step up from his earlier career in Revolution in the tag team, the junior tag team, up to the secondary character, and obviously that would be a big part of his story.
Definitely. So it's in mid to late 1990 that the tag team of Mitsuharu Misawa and Toshiaki Kawada really kicks into high gear, and they would go on to have like amazing tag matches with the likes of Jumbo and Taue, with the Miracle Violence connection of Terry Gordy and Steve Williams, and an assortment of other kind of makeshift teams that would come into All Japan, put together from among the native wrestlers, and with the foreign wrestlers that Baba would bring in, and it's just one of those tag teams that like you look at it on paper and you think, wow, Misawa and Kawada as a tag team, that must have been great. And then you actually watch their matches, and it was great. They had just a really excellent chemistry with one another as a tag team. I don't think it's Kawada's best tag team. I think Misawa and Kawada is Misawa's best tag team, but I don't think Misawa and Kawada is Kawada's best tag team.
Like the difference is that he had more time with Taue later on. Like that, if him and Misawa had a full decade or 6 years as a team, I think they would be a legendary team and more renowned than they are, because their time together, even though it wasn't as long as HDA, obviously, they were incredible workers. Like, I mean, this is no secret to anybody listening to this, but they also had amazing chemistry together as a team. And especially at that time period, they worked really well together, had some incredible matches. And it's no surprise that they were a part of so many great multi-man matches, but also just straight up tag matches against teams like, Jumbo and Taue. Like, they had a million matches with Jumbo and Taue that were great matches, up there with many classics. Maybe not at the tip top of the Kawada and Taue tag matches, but as a team, they were amazing and kind of underrated because they went on to so much more afterwards, and their time together was short. But if they had more time together, I think they would be as hailed of a tag team as there would be.
I just think with Kawada, from his perspective, that like in the Misawa Kawada tag team, he's the underling. He's the second to Misawa, and it's very clear in the way the dynamics of that team work. Whereas with Taue, right off the bat, I think Taue and Kawada are presented as equals, and that they're true partners in this team. Like, I never thought of Taue as Kawada's second. I always thought of Kawada as Taue as his tag team partner, as his equal in that team. So that's why I kind of like that team a little bit more than the Misawa Kawada team. And of course, there's more great matches to choose from because they had a longer tenure as a team together. But I don't know. I just think the dynamic is a lot more equal between Kawada and Taue than it is between Misawa and Kawada.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a great point as well. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, they weren't as good as the greatest tag team of all time here. So, it's like either way, they were awesome, more or less. But yeah, like the HDA team, when we get to that, those were incredible. Like, that was an incredible team.
Yeah, but we're sticking with the Sawa Kawada. They would enter the 1990 Real World Tag League on the November-December tour for All Japan Pro Wrestling, and they had an excellent run in that tournament. They accumulated 17 points, but they did lose matches to the eventual finalists of that tournament, which would be the team of Stan Hansen and Danny Spivey and the Miracle Violence Connection, who would go on to fight for in the tournament finals. But on the same show as the tournament finals, Dylan, there is an excellent tag match between Misawa Kawada and the team of Jumbo Tsuruta and Akira Taue. And this is on the December 7th, 1990 show from Budokan Hall. And I think it's a much better match than the finals. I could be biased here. I mean, I love Stan Hansen, and I love the Miracle Violence connection. I think the team of Hansen and Spivey is one of Hansen's best teams. I don't think it's his best team, but it's one of them. But my God, this match in Budokan Hall between Misawa and Kawada against Jumbo Tsuruta and Akira Taue is fucking amazing. I urge people to go check it out. You can find a lot of these matches on YouTube. Thank God. It's like, like the old classic All Japan stuff. Thank God it's just readily available for people to watch for free on YouTube and other streaming sites.
And thank God it is, because those matches are so incredible. Just amazing stuff there. Again, in my 90s project, that was ranked highly, the final show. Even there was a great tag match between those same four guys. Like I said, they had a million great matches. Taue and Jumbo versus Misawa and Kawada. They had a match from September 30th of 1990, which was a top 5 match of the year for me. I loved that match. And I love the follow-up too in the World Tag League. So it's like, take your pick of which one's better, but they were both classic matches.
Anytime these four guys were get in the ring together in a straight up 2-on-2 tag is just incredible. It's just, I cannot speak highly. Like, people speak about certain teams and series of matches like that happen in wrestling today, and I think if you have a point of reference to All Japan Pro Wrestling of the early 90s, that maybe you wouldn't necessarily think like this American team is like, oh, they're the greatest tag team of all time. I don't think they are. I think there's a lot of better tag teams in the history of wrestling. That's just me. It's just my opinion. But like, to me, I don't think there's many teams that equal like the team of Taue and Jumbo Tsuruta. And this is not a Jumbo Tsuruta or Akira Taue show, but I just wanted to put that out there that I think they're a much better tag team, like as short as their run was, than some of these other teams that people think are the best of all time.
The thing is that everybody in All Japan, because the booking was so good, all of these main guys blend into each other's stories. So it makes perfect sense to talk about these guys on every podcast. I guarantee you, when you do the Kobashi podcast, you'll be mentioning Misawa and Kawada a lot, and Jumbo as well. It's like, so much great things happen there. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of matches that you can watch through the 90s of these guys that are so great, and you'll just have a hell of a time. And it tells a great storyline of all of these guys, their back and forth role. And at that time, that was really transitioning to where, the end of the year in 1990 and the start of the year in 91, that was when Kawada would kind of go on his next step of where they had firmly established Jumbo and Misawa as a rivalry, and they really pushed Taue and Kawada as a rival in 1991. And that was we can talk about that.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Like, there's like an absolute bloodbath of a match between Kawada and Taue. That's just
I didn't
awesome.
want to jump ahead to that.
We'll get to that. Let me talk about two other dates, and then we'll get firmly into that. So it's in 1991 that the team of Misawa and Kawada would win the first of their 2 World Tag Team Championships. In this match on July 24th, it was against the team of Gordy and Williams. And then move into the fall of 1991, October 24th. This is something you mentioned before, Dylan. Kawada would make his first challenge of the Triple Crown in a losing effort against Jumbo Tsuruta. But again, just this really awesome match, and just the interactions between Jumbo and Kawada in here are just fantastic. But let's talk a bit about like kind of the rivalries that Kawada has. One is, of course, with Jumbo Tsuruta, and it's a very different rivalry that Jumbo has with him than it is against Misawa, as I said before. But also another big obstacle and singles rivalry that Kawada is developing is against Stan Hansen, and I will maintain that I think Stan Hansen has better matches with both Toshiaki Kawada and Kenta Kobashi than he does with Mitsuharu Misawa, because I think Misawa and Hansen have this really like kind of chemistry with one another. It's kind of like an anti-chemistry almost. Not that their matches are bad, but they're just not as high level as Misawa's matches with Jumbo are, or Misawa's or Hansen's matches are with Jumbo or with Kawada or Kobashi. And I think his matches with Kawada are really, really compelling and interesting.
Absolutely. And Kawada had a lot of respect for Hansen, too because of that. He was like his favorite guy to work with, especially of all the foreigners. And I think Hansen's just loved by everybody. First of all, to be fair, but still, just what an incredible performer he was. And like you said, having him and Kawada, I love their chemistry. It's what I mentioned earlier when we were talking about Kawada in the 80s. I think they're really similar stylistically. Never mind their stories or anything, just as wrestlers. It's heavy hitters, but with the secret ability to sell and make their matches great with through the nuts and bolts of wrestling. And I think both of those guys were masters at their craft on that level, and they don't always get the credit because I think so many people love just seeing them knock the hell out of people so much that that's what they remember them by. But so that aspect of their work kind of goes underlooked. But put them together, and they had some incredible matches. At the time, I actually liked, because remember in this 91 era, you mentioned the Jumbo rivalry. I liked Kawada's match with Jumbo better than Misawa's match of that year. Obviously, the 1990 match with Misawa and Jumbo were amazing and very important. But for the 91 match, Misawa and Jumbo had a third round in April, and I thought Kawada's match actually beat the third match on there. So I think that's very interesting that you started to see that. Hansen and Kobashi, I mean, when you get to Kobashi's podcast, their rivalry was incredible. That was the great stylistic battle, not just stylistic, but because of the roles they played. I think that's what elevated that, because Kawada was a step above Kobashi at this time. Kobashi was still a young guy. Like I said, Kobashi was more like Kawada in Footloose, and Kawada was more like he was becoming the Kawada we would know. So there was a different dynamic between those two, and it helped because Kobashi was such an expressive seller that he was able to get the most out of Hansen, whereas Kawada, he was rising his way up and getting there to be an equal to Stan Hansen. And stylistically, I think they were much more similar than Kobashi and Hansen. So it made the matches different, but equally satisfying, in my opinion, in a lot of ways. So you can kind of take your pick depending on what kind of dynamic you prefer between the two performers.
But we also want to get to like this other incredibly important rivalry that Kawada has at this time, and it's against his future tag team partner, and at this time one of his blood rivals, literally, and that's like Akira Taue. And like Akira Taue just has like this awesome, like, I don't know, like kind of aura to him, in my opinion, against people like Misawa and Kobashi. But like, the thing with him and Kawada as rivals is this, like, there's this pure hatred that exists there that obviously doesn't exist in real life, but in the ring, it's just like palpable, like how much they hate each other as being kind of like the seconds in their units, and like they have to kind of prove themselves to be on like be perceived on a similar level to like Misawa and Jumbo respectively. So they go out when they have singles matches against each other, or when they're paired against each other in multi-man tag matches, that the intensity just goes to a different level.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. They weren't just feuding with each other. They were feuding against the entire world's perception of them as the second best guys in their stables. So that added an increased intensity and increased hatred, like you said. Not necessarily real life feelings, but still, I'm sure. But they were able to bring their real life feelings of being pissed at being the second best guy, being viewed as that, into their matches, and it led to some incredibly hectic and violent brawls and matches that you wouldn't really expect in an All Japan ring between these guys. But their rivalry was so good. And again, to kind of bring it back, it's funny how it feels like a lot of these moments we talk about always seem to come together. It's like missing pieces of a puzzle you put in Kawada's career. Whereas, we talked about Jumbo and Tenryu and the relevance of Kawada and Misawa, and they were partners and then they broke up. It's funny because I think the thing that Kawada, his legacy with Taue, is that it was the complete opposite of him and Misawa, where they started out as hated rivals and then became tag team partners and came together. So it's like you had completely different wear and tear between these guys. But that match between those two, their first big singles match, January 15th, 1991, just an incredible bloody match with Taue. There was chairs going on, people were swinging, but it wasn't like a plunder match. Like, it was like they hated each other or were just grabbing anything they could to just beat the hell out of their opponent. Whereas that's like one of the things I don't like about the weapons matches is that sometimes it's like, let me try and grab a weapon that I need to use at this specific moment. Whereas in that match, it was more like, I will grab whatever I need to bust this guy open because I hate him so much. And it felt so, like you said, realistic how they did it. It was so passionate. Just a complete war. One of my favorite matches of either man's career, actually. And I think what made it special is that it was so outside the box for All Japan, because we all know the head dropping and the hard kicks and all of that stuff, the big moves and all of that. But this match and a lot of their matches, but especially their first match in '91, that was like something completely different than you would see in any Kawada Misawa match. Even though their animosity would grow and grow, it was so much more visceral between Taue and Kawada. So highly, highly recommend everybody watching that matches, and all of that rivalry is so good.
So jumping back into like 1992, Super Generation Army, they reached the finals of the Real World Tag League, but they lose against the Miracle Violence Connection. This was also for the vacant tag title. So it's kind of interesting, Dylan. Is like every year they would whoever held the World Tag titles would vacate them and put them up in the Real World Tag League. I'm glad they don't do that anymore because I don't like when teams don't lose the titles. I hate when they vacate titles for things like this. So I'm kind of glad
that's how it would often happen. Is like they would vacate them and then they just win the titles back at the end too. And that was kind of lame. Like you said, I much prefer them not do that as well. I agree with you.
On June 5th, he challenges for the Triple Crown again, but this time it's against Stan Hansen. In September, he defeats Taue to become the number one contender for the Triple Crown. This time it's held by his partner, Mitsuharu Misawa. So October 21st is the first time we see Toshiaki Kawada and Mitsuharu Misawa compete in a singles match against each other for the Triple Crown Championship. Of course, Kawada would lose that match. And then at the end of 92, we see Misawa Kawada enter the I got my notes mixed up a little here. The 92 Real World Tag League. And 91 they reached the finals. 92 they entered. This is their last time together. In the Real World Tag League together, Misawa and Kawada, and they finally win it. They've never won this tournament, but they finally win it, defeating the team of Akira Taue and Jun Akiyama, who has replaced Jumbo Tsuruta. And it was kind of interesting to see Taue and Akiyama team together because, like, I think what if that stayed together? What if it was like Akiyama as and Taue was going to be like his own guy and lead the faction, and Akiyama was going to be his second. That would have changed the course of All Japan Pro Wrestling, I think.
Absolutely, it would have been completely different if that had happened. And who's to say, because Kawada likely would have stayed with Misawa if that had happened. If Taue was going to be the leader, and then Akiyama was going to be like their number two. But like I said, if Kawada and Misawa had more time together, I think they would have still had a ton of classic matches, and everyone would have loved that whole run. Anyway, I don't think Kawada and Taue was a great rivalry, but the way, and the truth is, we saw what would happen later when Akiyama rose up against Misawa. He didn't really put him over until later on, so I don't think they could have been able to have. Misawa didn't give Akiyama the gentle touch that Jumbo gave Misawa. So you wouldn't have had somebody to feud with Misawa. So I think that would have been a really awkward dynamic going forward, because Taue was more known as Kawada's rival at the time, and Akiyama was still super young at that point and wasn't ready to be that top guy. So it would have changed everything around, but they still would have had many amazing matches, even though I think the storyline dynamics worked exactly the best as they could have with how it actually happened. But if that had happened, it would have been a crazy alternate universe. But I still think no matter what, there would have been a ton of classic matches between these four, one way or the other, regardless of who was teaming with you. Even if Taue had teamed with Misawa and Kawada and Akiyama were tag team partners, it still would have been great matches between these four. I just think that they were so talented that they made everything work.
Yeah. So by this time, we got to say that Jumbo is basically done as an active wrestler in All Japan Pro Wrestling, and Misawa is firmly established as the ace of the company. So, what that means is that, we need a new native rival for Mitsuharu Misawa. We need a new native rival to challenge, be the persistent challenger of our new ace. So, basically Baba says, well, that's going to be Kawada. So in the 1993 Champion Carnival, Baba plants the seeds for Kawada to send to that role with a classic time limit draw that happens between Kawada and Taue on April 12th. And this is a match that I reviewed with Brian Elliott on episode 6 of this series, and go listen to that, please. But the thing is like with that is like that's where they showed respect to one another. They buried the hatchet, and they would later, we're gonna get to it, but they're gonna form the Holy Demon Army from the kind of like the outcome of this particular match, Dylan.
Yeah, absolutely, and it was time. At that point, Kawada and Misawa had won the tag titles twice, actually, but neither one of those runs were exactly prolific. And the second one, it's like they won the tag league to win the tag league more so than the titles, and they lost them right away. So it's like at that point, Jumbo was going down with his illness, and the tag team, like you said, the main thing was to find a new rival for Misawa. And who better than Kawada at the end of the day? Of course, their run had been talked about. It felt like it was coming. It felt like it was time for Kawada to break out on his own, kind of in his own way, even though, like you said, they were more equals, Kawada and Taue. But still, they were it was so necessary to get Kawada away from Misawa so he could do his own thing and step out of that shadow. So I think that really worked on two dividends because it put him over and also allowed Kobashi to step up as the number 2. And much like I said earlier, Kawada went from his kind of footloose role to his number 2 role, and now he's at that top peak. And it let Kobashi step up from the junior tag team role to the number 2 role. So it helped everybody come together. And that's what really, that whole moment when he sided with Taue and they showed respect after these years of bloody rivalries that they had and bloody feuds and bloody brawls that they had, that moment really set the stage for the 4 Pillars of Heaven era of All Japan.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because in that match, that Champions Carnival match is, like Kawada's second in that match is Tsuyoshi Kikuchi. So after Kawada shakes Taue's hand and Masanobu Fuchi is Taue's second, and Kikuchi's just kind of giving Kawada this sideways glance. At least in my headcanon he is, at least. Like that's what I'm reading into it. But it's 1 month later on May 13th that Kawada has a singles match against Tsuyoshi Kikuchi. This is available on YouTube. I really recommend people go watch this match. Like I hope some point someone picks this match because I would love to rewatch it and review it for the series.
Not to interrupt you, but can I just say one thing? Kikuchi was so good, man. Like he was so awesome. Everything he did, all kinds of matches that he did the tag team. But whenever he would get a singles match against someone like a Kawada or a guy that was above his stature, it's like he was amazing in that role. And I always thought, like, man, this guy's so underrated. It's crazy how, like, his size has held him back so much because I think he had all the talent in the world to be a main event type of player that we should be talking about on this show more. But because of his size and because of how everything played out, it's like after this 4 Pillars era started, the juniors like really went down. Even more so than they already were, and they never were at a tip-top spot in All Japan, obviously, at that time. But someone like Kikuchi is so underrated historically, and he just made every match the best it could, and really helped get Kawada over in that incredible match that you're about to talk on.
Yeah, so the May 13th, Cork Hall match between Kawada and Kikuchi is basically like Kawada's departure from the Super Generation Army because 1 day later, the Holy Demon Army has their first match together as a tag team, and they take on the team of Kikuchi and Kenta Kobashi, which you can also see on YouTube. And I urge people to watch this because it's fucking great.
The thing is, if we and I was just thinking about this, the more we talk about these matches, it's like if we were to go over, imagine if we did a show. It was just one show about all of the great matches that these guys had with each other. This would be a 12-hour podcast that we would have, just even if we just briefly went over the matches. That's how many amazing matches these guys had with each other. You are missing out if you haven't seen some of this stuff. But yes, it's so satisfying too to see the way that the storylines come together and the seeds all grow into do different things. And this was another point where, like you said, whatever match you watch from this era where Kawada is about to turn, not necessarily, that's a little dramatic, but he went out on his own. all of them are great. I just watch all of them. It tells a great story. It sets up the future. It sets up great matches in the future, great singles matches and tag team matches. Everything about it was so well booked, so well performed. The crowds were super hot. It was just awesome. Like what an incredible period of wrestling this was.
Like you said, it's not an American style turn. Like Kawada basically, shakes Taui's hands, Kikuchi in my head canon gives him a sideways glance. Okay, this is going to lead to this singles match at Cork and Hall, which Kawada wins, and basically he leaves, Super Generation Army, and then he has his first match with Taue as his tag team partner as the Holy Demon Army, and they defeat Kikuchi and Kobashi. The really great thing about this, Dylan, is that Baba, like you're talking about, how a great booker he is, he keeps Kawada and Misawa away from each other, right? So people are probably thinking, oh my God, I now want to see Kawada, and what's Misawa going to do when he finally gets in the ring across from Kawada? But we're going to have to wait for that because 7 days after the Holy Demon Army have their debut match together as a team, they win the World Tag Team titles from Dr. Dusty Williams and Terry Gordy, and then it's on June 1st that finally this is Baba's made everyone wait for about a month or so. And it's finally June 1st, the Holy Demon Army takes on the new Super Generation Army team of Mitsuharu Misawa and Kenta Kobashi. And this is the first of many battles that these two teams would have against each other for the World Tag Team titles, Dylan. And what a great rivalry this is between these four guys.
Just like we mentioned, the team of Kawada and Misawa and Jumbo and Taue had a bunch of incredible matches, like tons of them, literally. And amazing that it would transfer to an even more well-known and well-renowned rivalry between Kawada and Taue and Kobashi Misawa, and stuff that, just the stuff of legend with some of these matches. Just so many great points. And like you said, just great booking to set them apart and make you wonder as a fan, like what's going to happen when they finally get at each other. All these years, Kawada, and Kawada had his fans and support too. I'm sure they were thinking, wow, he's been under Misawa this whole time. What's he going to do out as the top guy now? And it's kind of interesting too at this time period. I think I remember reading an old Observer where it said this, and I don't want to quote it directly. It's just, I may be wrong, but I think I remember reading this, that they might have hoped that Jumbo would be able to overcome everything and be able to come back again. Because this was really early on in everything that happened with him. So they might have been thinking that too as well. Like that could have been a little bit of a role they could have had. Or maybe earlier on people were thinking that Kawada was just going to strike out on his own. They didn't have this idea of uniting with Taue in mind. But then they came together, and I wonder how much they knew about, like Baba and company knew about what was going on with Jumbo, and if they were already planting the seeds for the huge future that we would have. Obviously, that would happen in real life, but it was great booking to have these guys apart and set up something like that, to finally have it, and just more great matches between all of these four. And they had great singles matches too. Even Kawada and Kobashi later on in the year. It's like these guys could do no wrong. Like these four pillars. That's why their legacy is so strong and so great as it is. Again, great storyline to follow if you watch all the matches in order. I think that enhances your experience, rather than because sometimes you can watch a bunch of matches in a row, and it's like by the third or fourth, fifth match, you're like, oh man, like this again, pretty much. But with the All Japan guys, if you watch their stories in a chronological order and their matches in a chronological order, I think it only makes the later matches better. It doesn't make you tire out of them. So I think that's a sign of a truly great. Everything about it was just great, in my opinion.
So in 1992 and 1993, Kawada's pretty much continuing his dominance as a tag wrestler. But he can't seem to put away either Misawa or Stan Hansen away in singles matches. So he's kind of just struggling in that regards. But like him and Taue are just having a stellar, 2-year run here as the Holy Demon Army. In fact, they hit them and the Super Generation Army. They meet in the finals of the 1993 Real World Tag League again. And that's another amazing match. It's like like Baba had this like amazing like ingredients, and he put these four guys together, and it created this wonderful like tag team stew, Dylan.
I think something that I did want to mention earlier, And I think it's important too that like your point about him being in singles matches and not getting over the hump was a big part of his story as well, and why he turned away. Because if you look at the last couple of months of his run in the Super Generation Army, he really went out with a bang in terms of some of his matches. Because like I mentioned, it's like they won the World Tag League, but then they lost the tag titles a month later. But then he had these singles matches against Stan Hansen and Misawa, like back to back. Stan Hansen in February 28th, and Misawa on March 27th, and that was at the Champion Carnival. And it's like those matches were so great, and you could tell, especially in the Misawa match, you could tell that he was getting more aggressive towards Misawa, and that he was ready to break out on his own, pretty much. So I think that told a great story in and of itself. The tag match in December 3rd, that was a top 5 match of the year that year for me. And like 93 was an incredible year of wrestling, by the way. That was the same year in general where you had stuff like Kandori and Hokuto's amazing match. You had the Thunder Queen match, Hansen and Kobashi. Their original match was amazing. And like a ton of stuff there. You had Hase and Muto as a tag team with Chono and Hashimoto had a great match. Vader and Flair even in America. So 93, you had a lot of great matches. But that match stands out to me as like a top 5 level match of that year. And among their rivalry, one of their absolute best. So that says something because they had many, many great matches. But to me, that match, the December 3rd match, was so incredible with all 4 men.
And then we move into 1994, which is a much, much better year for Kawada. He would enter the Champion Carnival, and he would go on a tear in that year's tournament, and he would win the whole thing, taking on Dr. Dusty Williams in the finals. He would come up short against Misawa once again for the Triple Crown on June 3rd. Like, so there's that saying, always a bridesmaid, never the bride. And that's kind of like the story with Kawada and Misawa. And just as a side note, I really want to put a plug in for our friend Jamesy over on his new podcast, the Boots and Trunk podcast, and he talks about this rivalry between Kawada and Misawa as a backdrop for the famous tag match we would see between Kawada and Taue against Misawa and Kobashi in 1995. He really talks a lot about the history of Misawa and Kawada. So I urge people to go check out the Boots and Trunks podcast on the We Don't Know Wrestling podcast network. That's an amazing first episode that James does with that as a topic. So just wanted to plug that while we're on the topic.
Absolutely. James did an amazing job. I love that guy a lot. I consider him a great friend too. And he knows his wrestling straight up. That was a great debut episode and about an amazing match. I'm sure we'll get into. But yes, this June 3rd match. I mean, this to me, when I first got into Japanese wrestling, when I first started watching it, this was like the match. Like of all of the match that everybody said was the greatest of all time or one of the greatest. And it's kind of crazy that that is its reputation. So it's really hard to say if it's the exact number 1 of all time. But to me, it's right up there. It's untouchable in a lot of ways. But if you watch all of the stuff that led to this moment and this match, I think it's an unbelievable classic. And this is something like this was the moment I was actually waiting for on this podcast, was to actually talk to you about this. Even when you were doing the Misawa show with Hisame, I was thinking of this exact moment to talk about. So I want to ask you a very important question here. I think it's been debated before, and I think we should talk about it now. Now, everybody knows the match itself was incredible, but Kawada lost. Do you think that this was the time to pull the trigger on Kawada? Because we'll talk about what happened later on after this, but do you think it would have been better if Kawada had gotten his big win here? Not too dissimilar to when Misawa upset Jumbo in 1990, 4 years prior. Do you think that this would have been the era, or like the right time rather, to pull the trigger on Kawada as the Triple Crown champion, finally beating Misawa?
So this is 94. Yeah, I'm going to say yes, because I think we're seeing the toll that the All Japan style is taking on Misawa physically. Like, he's not in the same, like, he's not like in Noah. This is not Noah Misawa, obviously, but this is not 91 Misawa either. It's not 92 Misawa either. It's taken its toll on him. Like, he's physically, showing the signs of the deterioration that would plague him throughout, like, from I'd say 98 on, in his career. And I think the thing about Kawada is that he holds up, like, physically really well throughout most of his career, even in this age of being dropped on his head. Like, he's literally dropped on his head multiple times by just Misawa alone, right? With Tiger Driver 91 and a bunch of, backdrops and German suplexes. So like, but he's able to, like, he's not, the best, shape of those guys, but there's nothing wrong with the way he looks for Japanese wrestling, in my opinion. And like, he's maintained like this kind of like certain level of like not being completely destroyed, like you'll see with Kobashi and Misawa later on. So like, I think, yeah, he should have, Baba should have pulled the trigger on this and had him win the Triple Crown against Misawa on June 3rd. I wouldn't be in the camp that says no to that.
Absolutely, and I think in hindsight, it's even more apparent that, to me, the one flaw that Baba had as a booker, and like we're getting to that turning point, the second half of the decade, I think that becomes a lot more evident than here. But I do think that Misawa was pushed as the be-all, end-all for a little too long, and I think Kawada winning here would have helped alleviated that a lot, actually, and especially considering how his title reigns went afterwards, Kawada's that is. I think him getting the huge win here would have felt like that would have, I think he would have been a similar amount of star either way, like, because I think it did work out in its own way with how it happened in real life. But if he had won here, that would have elevated him to a new level and as a true equal to Misawa, which I don't think he ever was. Even after he beat him, I don't think he was ever on Misawa's, like, and nobody was really, not just Kawada. But I think to the fans, Misawa was the ace of the company, and he always was. And I mean, he could still be the ace even if he lost here. There's no reason he couldn't have won it back, I feel like. But I think that this was the moment. He had a lot of momentum. I mean, this 6-month run, we mentioned the tag match at the end of the year. To this point, Kawada had incredible matches and incredible wins up and down the card. So I think that this would have been an amazing moment if Kawada had won. And I think that's something that's going to be talked about forever among old school pro res fans. This is like one of the great debates, I feel like. Should Kawada have gone over here? And I agree with you. I think he should have too. Actually, I think this is one of Baba's rare missteps. I mean, it still worked out, like I said, in the end. But I think it would have been that much better if Kawada had won.
Well, I mean, like, you can draw parallels with like Kawada and Misawa because, like, like Misawa never got his Triple Crown win over Jumbo, right?
Yeah.
Jumbo never put him over for the Triple Crown. Like, yeah, Jumbo put him over in singles matches, and he made Misawa a star. He made him basically the ace of the company, but like, he never did it for the Triple Crown. And I think if hindsight being 2020, if Baba knew that what would happen with Jumbo and his physical health, that he probably would have booked one of those matches for the Triple Crown, that Misawa would have beaten him for the Triple Crown. He wouldn't have beaten Stan Hansen for the Triple Crown. He would have beaten Jumbo Tsuruta. And I think hindsight being 2020, like, like Baba in 1998 would look back 4 years earlier, like, he would say, you know what, this is the time. It's Kawada's day. He's going to win the title here. And I firmly believe that he would have done that if he could have seen what would happen 4 years later with like the physical state of a lot of these guys.
Yeah, I agree. Hindsight is 2020. I guess you could say on that one, but I do agree with your point on him never beating Jumbo. I think that that was unfortunate. That would have happened if it wasn't for the illness, though. Like, so that's kind of a sad little thing there. That whole thing is a huge. That we could do a whole show on that in and of itself, the ramifications of Jumbo getting ill. But this is definitely a case of it. I just think that unfortunately he was trying to play the long game once again, and like you said, by the end of the decade, we had saw things had come home to roost pretty much by then. I think it would have been a little bit better, but still, just an incredible match, and its legacy is so strong that it's still considered, even 27 years later, still considered one of the greatest matches of all time by people who have seen it, and I think it still will be for many years to come.
Yeah, I think it's probably my favorite of their singles matches for the Triple Crown against one another. Like, I mean, that's you have to qualify a lot of their matches against each other. It's just a Champions Carnival match. This is just a regular singles match, and this is for the Triple Crown because they all have different dynamics. Like, depending on what the match is for between Misawa and Kawada. But it's not all, doom and gloom for Kawada in 1994. Dylan, he does indeed win the Triple Crown for the first time on October 22nd against Dr. Death Steve Williams in a very, really great match. I think this is like maybe one of the last of the great matches that Steve Williams is going to have in All Japan is around 1994.
Uh, yeah, 94 was Dr. Death's best year by far, in my opinion. And he had a lot of great matches. He was one of the best wrestlers of the year that year. And Kawada, like you said, he finally got his big win in October. Again, like you said, kind of like Misawa beating Hansen years prior. Now Kawada beat Dr. Death, so to speak. So that kind of set up an interesting little future rivalry, a future match. And I think that maybe he might have been thinking that way too. That Baba had already imagined Kawada winning the title, but he wanted to build up to a match against a guy he had never beat going forward. Although with how things played out, it played out in an interesting way. It didn't quite work out that way, but still.
Well, I think, one thing we have to talk about really briefly is that, it's not just a way to keep Kawada and Misawa away from the Triple Crown, away from each other in regards to the Triple Crown, right? Like having Kawada, trying to delay just like Kawada winning the Triple Crown from Misawa finally. I think there's also like it's an earnest attempt on Baba's part to find a Gaijin replacement for Stan Hansen in the form of Steve Williams, because obviously at this time Terry Gordy's out. His drug problems have like left Baba no choice but to get rid of him, and so like now it's up to Steve Williams to kind of like kind of take up the mantle of being the top foreign wrestler in the company that has been like Stan Hansen's kind of crown for the last 10 years at this point. And so like him getting the Triple Crown at this point it was, I think, very much a way to try to establish him in the eyes of the All Japan fans that this guy is not just a tag team wrestler. He's going to be an important like guy going forward in terms of like the foreign wrestlers that we bring into the company.
It was either going to be Dr. Death or Johnny Ace.
If you know me, I'm gonna go with Dr. Death any day of the week over Johnny Ace.
Johnny, I will give him credit. He had some good matches, and they were honestly, they were kind of an underrated tag team. Johnny Ace and Steve Williams. I'm on 95 now in the 90s project, and I've really been surprised by their chemistry as a team. I think they've done a great job in 94, 95 as a tag team. And then obviously in 95, you get somebody like a Gary Albright coming over to him and Doc's teamed a little bit as well. So you had the Patriot coming in. So you had a little bit of good foreign talent coming in 94, 95, 96. But I think definitely Dr. Death was the right option of the guys they had available at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, I don't want to just say this one point, and then we'll get back onto Kawada, but I do think, like, what was it called? The Triangle of Power? Dr. Death and Gary Albright? Very underrated tag team. Like, Gary Albright was really great at, like, just throwing people around with his suplexes and stuff like that.
Yeah, very, very good guy. I came from UWFI. I had the great suplex game. Great partner just in terms of how they looked together. I think they were a natural tag team. Even though I really enjoyed the Dr. Death and Johnny Ace tag team in terms of in-ring, Dr. Death and Albright, they were a natural pairing. It felt like more so than Johnny Ace. But like I said, then that led the way to Get in that 96 too with Kobashi and Ace and Patriot.
I'm sure I'll get to Get when I do the Kobashi show. But
yes, exactly. I can't wait to listen to that because when I will say this to everybody out there, when I was a young child, I was a huge fan of the Patriot when he was in WWF for his brief run, and I loved watching him. I always have a nostalgic pop for the Patriot here, but he doesn't really have that much to do with Kawada, unfortunately.
No, he does not. So Kawada is now the Triple Crown champion. He wins from Dr. Death, Steve Williams in 1994. He would hold that title for a little while. He would eventually lose it to Stan Hansen on March 4th in 1995. But, Kawada would get revenge for this loss of the Triple Crown to Hansen on March 27th, when he finally beats Hansen. I think this is like his first singles win over Stan Hansen in the Champion Carnival, Dylan.
Yep, absolutely. Great win for him. But this title reign is a very important part of Kawada's career. Like the first step in a long line of this sort of deal. Kawada, his only title defense was the 60-minute draw with Kenta Kobashi in January 1995. A legendary match in its own right. But the main thing was that he never had a truly successful defense where he won the match. He had a draw, and then he immediately lost it to Hansen. So he never really had a true defense of the title here. And this was the first of many that he would have. But like you said, it paid off with him getting the big one over Hansen. And like the way Baba booked, getting wins over guys was almost like winning a title in and of itself in that sort of way, where if you lost to a guy over and over and over, now finally beating him and overcoming that mountain, as you mentioned earlier, meant something as much as a title almost.
I mean, like with Baba, it's either like three scenarios that you have for like getting big wins. It's either for a title, in this case would be the Triple Crown. It's either in the Champion Carnival, whether it's in a tournament match or in the finals, or it's in a Budokan singles match, like in a maybe semi-main or the main event of Budokan Hall, of a Budokan Hall show. So like that's kind of like Baba's kind of way of booking things is like those where you get your big singles wins is either in those scenarios. Like you get big wins like in Osaka or in Hiroshima or Nagoya or other parts of Japan, but like he says like the big singles like pushes for Tokyo, right? So especially in Budokan Hall is like of course the home of All Japan Pro Wrestling's like legendary matches and stuff like that. So like it's one thing I've realized about Baba is like he really loves Budokan Hall. He loves it more than the Tokyo Dome. So and there's a reason why, because it's a much better venue than the Tokyo Dome.
Well, Budokan Hall was a legendary building and had so many great matches, and that was by design on Baba's part. So great stuff there. I love seeing that. But yeah, the sad thing is that it was really Hansen was more or less a transitional champion back to Misawa, which goes back to my earlier point that they kind of relied on him a little too heavily, in my opinion, in the 90s, especially this second half of the decade we're getting into. I think that they could have given Kawada a little bit more, but it kind of played into his overall story. So like I said, it worked out in the end.
I mean, like you've used the phrase snake bitten when you come to talking about Kawada, especially with his relationship with the Triple Crown. I see a lot of parallels between like Kawada in the 90s and with like the career of Go Shizaki up until this point, right? Because like for the longest time, like Go Shizaki was like one of the worst snake bitten people in wrestling as far as like being a world champion in whatever company he was working for at the time, until this current run he's having, like which is like kind of the run of his career that he's had in the last year or so. Like Kawada would have that. We're gonna get to that obviously at some point. Yeah. Like his when he finally is gets the big title reign, but we're not there yet. So we got to continue with 1995. Holy Demon Army retained the World Tag Team title in an absolute belter of a tag team match against Misawa and Kobashi. This, Dylan, to me, this is the greatest tag team match of all time. I know some people are saying like something that happened in 2020 is the greatest tag team match of all time. Well, you've never seen this fucking tag match. If you think that 2020 tag team match is the greatest tag match of all time, this June 9th, 1995 is the greatest tag team match of all time.
I completely agree with you, and I know Jamesy agrees with us. So we have the triumvirate of approval to this match, and I think, and we're far from alone in this.
We are the true triangle of power here. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. He's the spiritual third member of the show right now. But I couldn't say anything that hasn't been said before by him and many other people. Just one of the greatest matches of all time. You can make the case it was the best overall match of all time. Let's just say by the end of the 90s project, I'm going to redo, I'm going to look over every list and make an overall list of the decade. I'm going to have a lot of hard decisions to make about what turns out to be number one, because this was every bit on the same level as 6-3-94. And the crazy thing is, and during this time, this is a little bit of a footnote in and of itself, but this was a top 3 match of the year for me. Kawada had a singles match with Taue in the Champion Carnival, his first since they were a team. That was an incredible match. It's like they still had this amazing chemistry that they had together. I would have loved to have seen at some point Kawada reunite with Misawa as a team, just to see what they would do, even if it was just for like one match or two. I would have loved to have seen how that would have played out.
I would have loved to have seen Kobashi and Kawada as a tag team, like on Misawa and Taue, either them as a tag team or them with different partners. Like Misawa would probably get it with like either Akiyama, which is eventually what happened, or with Ogawa. And like Taue, I don't know, maybe Taue would have gotten like Takayama as his partner or something like that.
That would have been awesome. Like I said, I would have loved all of those combinations. But it's like so many great matches. But the tag match is definitely the top of the heap. But like that Taue Kawada singles match, the Misawa Taue singles match in the Champion Carnival was an incredible match. It's like my top 3 matches of that year, top 4 even. They had a sequel to this match too. The 6-9 match, they had another match in October 15th, which was an incredible match on top of it. So it's like these guys dominated 1995. I felt like in terms of the overall year of classic wrestling, these four were truly the four pillars, and that match stands at the top of the heap. Just a all-time classic.
Is amazing. 95 actually, like it's a great year for the Holy Demon Army. They remain dominant in the tag division, and Kawada is starting to get really, get significant wins in the singles division as well. Particularly against like people who are beneath him, right? But he the person he comes up short against constantly is, of course, is Misawa, and they have a match on April 14th in 1996 that goes to a time limit draw, another classic match in their series of matches. He challenges for the Triple Crown again, but this time against Taue, who is now the champion, and he comes short. He comes up short in that match, which is on June 7th, 1996 as well, which is, I think, a really good feather in the cap of Akira Taue.
Yeah, that was his only title reign with the Triple Crown. So that was a great run for him to finally get that moment for him. And he got a huge pop when he won, too, when he won the title. I remember reviewing that match way back in the day for Pro Wrestling Spirit. But, like, I was watching that stuff, and I was thinking, man, this whole era, they could do no wrong. It felt like with these four, any combination you put them together with, and Akiyama was starting to come up here, too, in the 96 era. So it's like any combination of these guys, and of course, let's not forget the Patriot as well sometimes. But whatever combination you want to go in with these guys, they would have an incredible match. And for Taue to get that win, totally deserved. He's a guy that gets a negative reputation sometimes because he wasn't as good as the other three. But no, still a legend, still an all-time classic worker, and well-deserved for to have that Triple Crown reign. And who better to put him over in the title defense than Kawada?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Kawada did for Taue what Misawa wouldn't do for Kawada for the longest time,
Yeah,
so,
or Akiyama for the longest time as well.
Akiyama is a completely different animal that I'm gonna do a show completely on Akiyama with somebody in the future as well. But things continue in All Japan without much change for Kawada until April 19th. 1997, as this is the date of the Triple Crown, the Champion Carnival finals that goes into, because of the way the points worked out, Dylan, it goes into a three-way tie between Misawa, Kobashi, and Kawada. And the winner is to be determined by a round-robin series of matches. And I'm going to say I'm not a fan of the booking of this, right? So round one is Misawa versus Kobashi, which goes to a 30-minute time limit draw. So right after that match, it's round two, and it's Kawada versus Misawa, and Kawada finally defeats Misawa in a singles match, but it's a tainted win, and I don't know anyone who doesn't think it's a tainted win, because obviously, Misawa is worn out. He went 30 minutes with fucking Kenta Kobashi. That's not going to wear you out. Of course it is. And then he would defeat Misawa for that, and then he would go on to beat Kobashi. And win. This is his second Carnival win for Kawada, but it's kind of tainted. Like, I really still trying to wrap my brain around why Baba would book it this way.
Well, this is something that really resonated with me. I always say this. I've had some successes in my life, and I always like to say I only succeed in the most ass way possible. This is exactly what it felt like. And I believe that a big reason behind this, and this is a very important part of Kawada's career we're about to talk about here, he had super heat from Baba at this time, because in 96, he publicly criticized Baba and All Japan for not having more interpromotional wrestling, because his basis of this opinion was that New Japan and UWFI were having record-setting business working together, so that All Japan should do the same thing. Baba didn't feel the same way, as it turns out. And it's, he had his run. I mean, they couldn't just completely just trash him or bury him or anything, but he was never at that level. And I think that this win over Misawa was such a blow, because this totally overwrote whatever good you could have gotten from that June 3rd, 94 match. To have Misawa finally lose to Kawada, it's like he does it in this terrible way with the switcheroo kind of finish here. I just thought it was such a misstep. Like, one of Baba's worst decisions, in my opinion, was this whole deal. And I really think it was due to political reasons for Kawada, he's an outspoken guy, he's a straight shooter. I think a lot of people would describe him as, for better, sometimes worse. Like, so he'll say stuff that maybe not everyone loves, and Dr. Death had a shoot interview one time where he talked about Kawada, and he was like, yeah, I loved everybody, but I hated Kawada's guts, and he hated me, pretty much. And it's like, he was a real straight shooter. So he had a little bit of an issue there, and I think that's what led to all of that, because it was a huge just disservice to that entire, like, literally a 7-year storyline that they had, just totally blown, in my opinion. But thankfully they still had the Triple Crown win to bench him, because like that win, he finally beat Kobashi, but again, he never was able to defend the title, just like the first time. So it was tough, man, for Kawada at that time.
Yeah, I mean, it just boggles the mind, because like you got to give Baba credit for being one of the smartest bookers in the history of wrestling, but this is just baffling, and it's sad. It's sad that it's because like he like I can understand it, because it's wrestling, because it's Japanese wrestling, and so like Baba was very much like, I'm the boss, you don't question the boss, like don't go against me publicly. Like, I think it would have been one thing if he went to him privately and said, like, I really think we should do like something with FMW or with UWFI or whoever, right? Or at the time that he maybe Baba wouldn't have like taken out on him, but he said this stuff publicly, so there you go. But it's not like Kawada finally does it. He beats Mitsuharu Misawa for the Triple Crown title. It's May 1st, 1998. It's in front of 58,000 fans, or so they say, Dylan. I don't know if it's actually 58,000 fans. It could be 38,000 fans for all we know in reality, but it's at the Tokyo Dome, and it's a great match. It's a 28-minute match, and it's one of my favorite matches of the rivalry. It's not because he finally beats Misawa, right? That's the main reason. It's a great match in of itself, but it's that reason alone that pushes it to a higher level for me. But it's not as good as the match, the June match that I talked about before. I think it's a much more, closer to my heart when I first saw it maybe 20 years ago or something like that. But it's a great moment for him, and I think it's a great kind of like stamp of approval that he got to do it at probably the biggest audience that All Japan had up to that point.
Yeah, and like to kind of just to tie off what we were saying about the draw in the Carnival of '97, because we kind of jumped ahead a little bit there. Basically, he lost to Misawa a month later, and it's like that was kind of like, okay, you got that 5-minute win, but then Misawa just put you in your place a month later to the fans. And at that time, Kawada was really struggling with all of this because he had super heat. His storyline had been messed up, and in his book, he talked about how he went to his old high school where he and Misawa went. He climbed to the roof and was thinking about jumping off and committing suicide. In his book, he talks about those struggles that he had, but then obviously he turned it around and was able to persevere for the next year. It took him a year, but he finally got this big moment in the Tokyo Dome. In the rare case of an All Japan in the Tokyo Dome, they had this match against some people say 58,000, some people say less. No, nobody knows for sure, but I know that no wrestling promoter would ever lie. But I actually completely agree with what you said. As a match, it's not as good as like the '94 match or some of their other singles matches. But what made it so great was the real life implications of him finally winning it. It's like, at their whole lives, they wanted to be pro wrestlers, most of these guys. They wrestled at the same high school together. Misawa was always getting more from All Japan itself. From the very beginning, he was Tiger Mask while Kawada toiled away in places he hated. Misawa was getting titles and being Jumbo's successor, and Kawada wasn't. The rivalry between these two went so far beyond any kind of like storyline or anything. And a true win over Misawa. Like the Champion Carnival one, that was bullcrap. Everybody knew it. But like a true win would still mean everything to Kawada, especially for the title. So of course, I think it was the perfect way to settle their match in the Tokyo Dome, the biggest match in company history. You could argue it was the biggest match in All Japan's history, this title match, if you count the dome and everything. And the thing I loved about that match was that it felt real and his emotion was real. And I think that wasn't just acting. I think it was real because there was a real way, if you watch that match, you could tell that Kawada had, not this time, like that kind of feel to it. Like, not this time. And especially the ending, if you want proof of what I'm saying is true. because that was such a real reaction when his hands flew up in the air immediately. It was real. And at the end of it, his promo said, "This is the happiest moment of my life." Was his promo, and I think it was totally true when he finally beat Misawa, and such a great thing. And I wish it could have led to more, but that wasn't to come quite yet.
No, I mean, as significant as this moment was and this win was for him, he would lose the Triple Crown 1 month later in his first defense against Kenta Kobashi on June 12th. I think it's very clear at this point, Dylan, that Kenta Kobashi is the successor to Misawa. That's in Baba's eyes, it's not going to be Kawada. Kawada's going to be the perennial, runner up. But it's gonna be Kobashi, it's gonna be Misawa, and then the torch is gonna be passed to Kobashi. And then if everything had stayed the same, if like All Japan never split into two companies, that probably Akiyama would have gotten the rub from both Misawa and from Kobashi, and he would have been the next Triple Crown ace leading into the 2000s. But Kawada, it's interesting because I don't think I wouldn't have done it this way if I would have made Kawada like a top guy on the same level as Misawa, and so Misawa didn't always have to carry the burden of not taking time off, just to spread kind of the responsibility around almost as well. But Kenta Kobashi, he's gonna bear the burden of the guy who's gonna be the successor to Misawa, not Kawada.
Yeah, and that's pretty much exactly what happened in Noah when Kobashi had his huge title reign. But remember that he was breaking down too, even by the time of the split. Kobashi's knees were completely shot at that point. And like we kind of mentioned, out of all of them, Kawada was the one that never really broke down. Not to say that he didn't go through some pain and tough times, but he was always Kawada. And it's like these other guys were falling apart. By the end of this 2000s, 1999, 2000 run. So it's like Kawada was more healthy than these guys, even Kobashi, even though he was younger. So it's really interesting how that was the case. I think that Baba saw Kawada as the foil, not necessarily the star, if that makes sense. And that's why, but he always protected him in the tag scene, which is important. The tag titles were valuable in All Japan, so you can't take that away. And even though he lost the title right away to Kobashi, that sucked. They put him back with Taue and to continue his title reign, because remember he was double champion at that point when he won the title from Misawa. So he had that reign with the tag titles, and that lasted for almost a year. So they kept him in the tag scene and kept Kobashi as Kobashi Misawa as the main guys. And also Vader was coming back around the corner as well to be their new Gaijin star, foreigner star. So I think that that's kind of important. That it felt like Baba had roles in mind for everybody. And even though Kawada was so important to the fans and this title run was so amazing, it's like he still had him in that tag role, I felt like.
Yeah, he's kind of like the blueprint of like someone like Hiroki Goto.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
If Hiroki Goto ever won the IWGP title, which he's never going to, but at least Kawada actually got to be the Triple Crown champion a couple of times. But we're gonna jump to 1999, Dylan. We're gonna jump to the date. It's January 22nd, and this Kawada Misawa again for the Triple Crown championship, and if nothing else, this match is just an unbelievable testament to the sheer force of will of Toshiaki Kawada, because about 7 minutes into this match, Kawada breaks his arm by against the back of Misawa's head. So he clubbers Misawa in the back of the head, but he shatters his own the bone in his arm, and then he wrestles for the next 20 minutes with a broken arm against Mitsuharu Misawa. And there are points in this match where you're like, is everything okay? But for a large part of it, I think that it's very hard to tell that Kawada actually broke his arm, because he's still doing a lot of his spots and his moves. Of course, the main evidence of that something is wrong is the fact that he accidentally creates this move called the Genzo Bomb, which was him trying to do the I think he was trying to get Misawa up for the folding power bomb, but obviously he couldn't with the broken arm. So he just has Misawa awkwardly dangling between his legs and just drops him on his head. And it's Well, there you go. The Ganso bomb. I remember when I first saw this match and I saw this move, I jumped out of my seat and I was like rewound that VHS tape like about 5 times because I thought, oh my god, what did I just watch there? And then I think by the fourth or the fifth time I rewound it, I was like, oh my god, he didn't kill him, did he? He didn't cripple him or anything, did he? Like that was the kind of like my next concern. But like I think it's Masao Inoue who's on the outside. His reaction to this Ganso bomb is worth a star rating in of itself.
I totally remember this. Like now you bring it up, I totally remember Masao Inoue on the outside. So that tells you how great of a reaction it was.
It's the greatest thing Masao Inoue has ever done in his career.
Yes, absolutely. His highlight of his career here. But that would make sense. Even though it was an accident, it totally made sense. Kobashi had the Burning Hammer. Misawa had the Tiger Driver 91. So now Kawada has this new, more devastating version of his move. But because it was an accident, it wasn't his finisher. like this should have been the finish of the match for all rights and purposes. But instead, he kicked out. That's the thing that nobody talks about is how Misawa actually kicked out of the Gonzo Bomb. And like to me, the Gonzo Bomb was the most dangerous one of all of them. And he still kicked out of it. So it was just kind of crazy how that worked. An accident, and thankfully there were no serious injuries because of it. But just crazy, like you said, to do this with a broken arm. It all collapsed on him to do this move. He wanted to do the regular folding power bomb, but still just an incredible performance there. But obviously it led to him, of course, giving the title up one day later after he won it. So another failed title reign for Kawada there. Hey, how long, before we move on to the final part of all this, how long do you think before Taichi steals the Gonzo Bomb?
Oh, I'm surprised he hasn't. I think once Naito agrees to take it, which I'm sure it'd be any day now. Like, oh yeah, drop me on my head. It's no problem. Like maybe Naito's just saving his neck only for Ibushi. Who knows?
Yeah, but Ibushi or Naito are the only ones that will take that move from Taichi. If Taichi, God forbid, ever gets a title shot against Ibushi, that will be the finish of the match. Ibushi hitting a Gonzo Bomb or getting hit with a Gonzo Bomb somehow.
Yeah, I can see Ibushi taking that move as well. But yeah, like you're saying, Dylan, it's either Naito or Ibushi's gonna be crazy enough to take a Gonzo Bomb from someone like fucking Taichi. Not that he's a bad worker. Like I think he's a very safe worker, but I still wouldn't let him drop me on my head like the Gonzo Bomb. But let's get on to the kind of the tail end of like the Four Pillars era for Kawada here. Like Misawa and company are wrapping things up, eventually leaving to form Pro Wrestling Noah. But and so Kawada would have 2 more singles matches in All Japan against Misawa, one for the Triple Crown and one in the Champion Carnival. He would lose those matches, and this kind of mirrors what would happen, in Noah in the Tokyo Dome in the future. But we'll get to that in a little later. And here's an important date: June 16th, 2000. Misawa and most of the roster. They have a prayer conference where they announce they're leaving All Japan Pro Wrestling to form Pro Wrestling Noah. And, this, except for, a few people are going to stay. One of them is Kawada. The other one is Masanobu Fuchi. Another one is Taiyo Kea. Another one is Stan Hansen. So this is kind of like the crux of what's the remnants of a decimated All Japan. But, by default, Kawada basically becomes the new ace of the company. The role I think he always thought he should have, not replacing Misawa, but in conjunction with Misawa.
Yeah, I mean this split, the All Japan and Noah deal, has been talked about for so many times, and there's so much to it too, that if we just went through a timeline, it would be kind of crazy. But he was a huge Kawada was very instrumental in saving this company and keeping it alive to this day in its current form, because without him, they would have had nothing, pretty much. But through him and through Mrs. Baba, they were able to get Tenryu back on board, and also opened up, because this is what Kawada wanted all along, was to work with other companies, and they got to immediately start inter-promoting with New Japan at the time too. So it's like we got to see Kawada do his thing in more of a star leading role. But I know that must have been such a crazy time for everybody involved, because a lot of people thought that was the end of the line for All Japan anyway. That when this was happening, a lot of people thought that this could be the end of the line. Mrs. Baba and Misawa had a huge grudge against each other at the time. Kyohei Wada stayed as well, the referee. And Kawada's whole deal was to summarize his whole point of view and all this, or what he said anyway. Like you said, what you said probably had a lot to do with it as well. But his whole statement publicly was essentially, "I want to keep Baba's All Japan alive." That was more or less his reasoning for staying publicly, and so it was just a crazy time, but it led to the split, and it led to a new era for Kawada in addition to All Japan that led to so many things that wouldn't have happened if, first of all, Misawa had stayed. I don't think things would have played out anywhere nearly the same as they would have, because, like I said, they wouldn't have interpromoted with New Japan if things had stayed intact. And Tenryu probably wouldn't have come back almost certainly at the time. But that was a great gain for him, too, because Kawada was able to help bring him along as well, to bring him back. And that meant a lot. That basically saved All Japan, in all honesty.
Well, I mean, like, I'm gonna be a bit more cynical, Dylan. I think Kawada stayed because, like, there was like legit heat between him and Misawa.
There was. There totally was.
And he knew, like, like if he went to Pro Wrestling Noah with them, like, I'm sure he was invited. I'm gonna say, like, Misawa would have been a complete idiot if he didn't try to invite and try to bring over, like, Kawada as well, like, because that would have done wonders for the business for Pro Wrestling Noah to have that rivalry continue in a new company.
And they brought him back as soon as they could, pretty much. They didn't bring him anyway, so of course he wanted him. And like you said, yes, the real reason is, yes, that played a lot into him. I'm just saying what he said publicly about.
Yeah, publicly, like, I'm sure there's a kernel of truth there, but I think the real reason is, like, I'm gonna get fucked because it's gonna be Kobashi and Akiyama who are gonna get the rub, and I'm gonna be the one putting them all over, and I'm not gonna get anything for myself. But for him, ultimately, this was a good thing because he helped open the doors for a relationship between All Japan and New Japan that even All Japan as a roster was completely done. Like, it was just filled with nobodies and freelancers, and but the brand still had a value to it, especially when that brand was like All Japan versus New Japan, and we're gonna have Kawada versus the then IWGP Heavyweight Champion Kensuke Sasaki, and these two would meet in the Tokyo Dome in a title match, but it didn't need a title attached to it. October 9th, 2000. One of the hottest crowds you're ever going to see in the Tokyo Dome is attending this match, and it's an awesome war of attrition between Sasaki and Kawada. And it would be like, it's really interesting to watch this match and then think about later as Sasaki becomes a freelancer and he makes his way into All Japan, and then they rekindle the rivalry as with Sasaki kind of as more of a permanent member of the All Japan roster. But this is a great first meeting between these two.
Incredibly good and also incredibly important. Again, I think also a big part of it too is kind of what I alluded to. Like, the first couple of years of post-split All Japan was really Kawada got to have his way in a lot of ways, because this is something he had called on for almost 5 years, to work interpromotional feuds, and now he's getting to do it with a great opponent for him in Kensuke Sasaki. You got to have his mentor Tenryu come back. And he could do his thing how he wanted. And remember, at that time, too, there was a lot of, like, Onita tried to get it back into All Japan, and Kawada basically shut that down immediately. He was like, I don't want him here. And, if it wasn't up to him, if Baba was still alive and he wanted him, he would have been brought back. But Kawada got to do things his way, being the top star. Like, in Noah, if Misawa wanted something, Kawada wouldn't have had a say in it. So in All Japan, he got to do his own thing. And I think that really led to a lot of great things and a revitalization of Kawada in terms of his wrestling as well, because he was very energized and he wanted to be an appropriate ace for the first time in his career and get this great run, this great popular feud with New Japan. And it really worked out for All Japan, and again helped keep that whole company alive. That match is very important as well. In addition to Tenryu coming back, that little rivalry with Sasaki was very important.
Yeah, I mean, like, we should talk about Tenryu. So like you're saying, he comes back. Kawada and Mrs. Baba both make the decision to bring Tenryu back. Like, well, Giant Baba was alive, that was never gonna happen, because he fucking hated Tenryu for leaving him in the first place to start up his competition. But what's interesting with that is that it's Tenryu who wins the Triple Crown because Kobashi has to vacate it because he's left the company. So October 28th, 2000, 20 days after basically this match that Kawada has against Sasaki, like there's the Triple Crown tournament finals. It's Kawada versus his mentor, Genichiro Tenryu. And Tenryu goes over Kawada and has, I think, one of the really super underrated run with that title. Like, Tenryu's run with the Triple Crown in 2000 is pretty fucking great in my opinion. And part of it is like his this like kind of budding rivalry that he's creating with Kawada in the 2000 All Japan.
Tenryu in All Japan was awesome. Like, great worker. Showed himself as one of the greatest of all time in yet another decade. He had done it in the 80s. He had done it a bit in the 90s. And then he did it again in the 2000s with All Japan. I couldn't speak more highly of Tenryu as a worker. But Kawada was doing a lot of interesting things at the time between All Japan and New Japan. He got to do some really cool things, and I think that really helped him out as well. I really appreciated some of his run. Remember, he was in the tournament final. He did have a match with Sasaki at one point for the title in the Tokyo Dome, actually, that year, because they had the tournament going on, and he beat Tenzan earlier in the night and faced Sasaki in the final. So you had the title match, too, with Sasaki later on after their big match. Like you said, you had Tenryu facing Kawada for the Triple Crown tournament final. There were a lot of tournaments for titles, apparently, like during this whole run, if you noticed. But Kawada seemed to always make the finals and lose. So that fit his character, too, because he was, at this point, everyone kind of knew him as the cursed champion, quote unquote. He was always number 2. He'd never really gotten over that hump, even though he was now the ace of All Japan. But they were building to that, thankfully. So great part.
Yeah, I mean, like the whole point, I think, of Tenryu being the Triple Crown champion was to free up Kawada. Like, it's not like he'd be going up against any of these New Japan guys as a Triple Crown champion, and
exactly.
Even in a tag match, like for his team to lose the fall with him being the Triple Crown champion, it's like that's not really going to work politically. So, I mean, having Tenryu as a TC champion while Kawada's making all this money going to fight against New Japan guys is like, it's a win-win to me. Like, and we got to talk about his tag team with Masanobu Fuchi, right? Because Masanobu Fuchi is one of the guys who doesn't go to Noah, and him and Kawada formed this tag team. And at this point, like, I'm not, when I'm starting to watch this stuff, like, I'm not super familiar with Fuchi. I just know him as, isn't he in the opening matches? Isn't he a comedy dude? But my God, no, Fuchi is still a great worker. And if you want to see an example of like how great Fuchi is in this era in 2000, watch the match him and Kawada have against Yuji Nagata and Takashi Iizuka. Like, that is one of the greatest tag matches I've ever seen. And it's probably, it's a great example of like, you know what? This guy might be a little bit older, but he's still got a lot of fight in him.
WH, did you steal my notes before this? Because I was going to say that same thing. I was going to bring up that exact match there. I love that match. That was one of the best matches of the decade for New Japan, in my opinion. And in no small part, so unsurprisingly, due to Kawada. But like you said, Fuchi steps up again. Whenever Fuchi got a spotlight, he always did awesome. During this era and in the 90s, it's just like I said, the juniors kind of went way down the second half of the decade after Jumbo got ill and stuff. They kind of had less importance in the multi-man rivalries. But man, Fuchi was a great worker, great heel too. He was the perfect guy to invade New Japan and be a dick to these guys. Even guys like Nagata, who was a main eventer, and Iizuka, who was a really good mid-card worker at the time. He wasn't a main eventer, but he did some great things. At the time, he was really well noted in the Hashimoto and Ogawa rivalry as Hashimoto's second. So he did some good things, but to see these four, they just had a great match. Unbelievable tag team match.
Yeah, I mean, from here, like I say, like 2000 and 2002, it's like kind of uneventful years for Kawada. But on September 6th, 2003, he wins the Triple Crown for the 5th time in a tournament final against Shinjiro Otani, his rival in terms of like who has the best facial expressions in wrestling. But that's a great match. I loved that match when I saw it, and I urge people to go look for it. I'm sure it's out there. He starts this is the beginning of his quote unquote his ace reign. He has 10 successful title defenses that has it's been matched, but I don't think it's been broken. Kento Miyahara is not broken this title defense yet, but he has he has 10 successful title defenses against the likes of Genichiro Tenryu, Shinya Hashimoto, Jamal aka Umaga, Taiokeya, Kensuke Sasaki, and Hiroyoshi Tenzan, among other people. It's something that I think he deserved to have, and it's something like I kind of hope they never break his record.
Yeah, I think we got to talk about something that before that. It was uneventful for him in the ring, but there was something very eventful that happened in All Japan, and that was Muto coming in and taking over. And along with Satoshi Kojima and Kendo Kashin, they all jumped over from All Japan. And basically, Muto's idea of wrestling is very influenced by American style wrestling. Obviously, he was very famous in America too, but it wasn't Baba's All Japan. Pretty much. It wasn't even Kawada's vision. So this is kind of an interesting thing. I don't think a lot of people know this part because everyone knows Muto took over from Mrs. Baba eventually. But actually, the week before that happened, Kawada met with Baba and tried to take it over. Like him and Fuchi, they basically pleaded to get rid of Muto and the New Japan guys. And like they were ruining the company in his world, and he wanted to do his own thing. And that how different would All Japan have looked if Kawada was the one that had gotten power instead of Muto at that time?
I mean, I don't think it would have survived. I'm sorry. Like, I have some issues with like some of the ideas Muto would bring into All Japan, definitely. But like, I think he saved that company. To be honest with you, like, from a objective point of view, I think he saved business wise. He saved that company. Kojima becoming the new ace of the company did wonders for All Japan. Yeah, I mean, like there's a lot of stupid things that Muto does, but like I think overall, like what ideas did Kawada have? Like, and what influence did Kawada have to bring in like fresh people who can draw money in All Japan? Like, I don't think he had that kind of cachet in him like that Muto had. So. And like the thing is like we have to remember he also brought in Kaz Hayashi, who really basically saved the junior division of All Japan and made it on par with what was going on in New Japan and in Pro Wrestling Noah as far as the juniors go. Like that's because like Muto wanted like a good junior division. He brought in like Kendo Kashin did nothing for that, but it was Kaz Hayashi who basically fucking saved that title and that division and led it to like its heights basically.
At least they wouldn't have had to lose the title that Kashin stole when he left All Japan and took with him. They would have kept that title at least if Kawada had gotten rid of all those guys. I think if he had gotten rid of Kojima, I agree with you. But I think Muto was a really bad booker actually for All Japan. I hated that era, like in all honesty, like Pro Res Love era. The stuff with 8-Man, it's like I thought that all sucked. Like Taichi was a terrible young lion. I thought. No offense to him, but he was really bad back then. And they had some guys. The rumor is Kawada. His big idea was this really isn't that surprising considering his personality. His big idea was to bring in like Kiyoshi Tamura and guys that had been left behind by rings, and move them into All Japan and do that sort of thing. And I don't know how that would have worked. They were popular in that era, but with MMA coming in, I don't know how well that would have taken, especially to the All Japan fans. I think that would have been a radical change if that had happened. But it would have been radically different for sure, no matter what his plans were, because Muto was so outside the box thinking. I think that there was a lot of good, but the main thing is Kojima coming over was a huge thing because that allowed them to have a future ace. That if he had left, no matter who Kawada had brought in, it wouldn't have been as good as Kojima. Unless he convinced somehow like Nagata to jump and said somehow or something else, like something crazy. Kojima being there was so important, even more than Muto, in my opinion, because I really think Muto wasn't a good booker. But like you said, they did bring in some guys, and you have to give them his due. But they also had some bad ideas, like bringing in Goldberg that cost a ton of money at the time. And there was a lot that was questionable on that end. But Kawada was there. He did his thing. And I think it's very interesting to note that because he was the guy that had pushed for interpromotional stuff for all those years. And then it's like, as soon as Muto came in with his stupid ideas, he was like, no, I changed my mind. Baba was right. Pretty much. I mean, I don't know if he actually said that, but that's kind of how it comes across. That's kind of ironic that he wanted to get rid of those guys when it actually came to his doorstep.
Yeah, I mean, I do think he had a fondness for Kojima. He puts him over on February 16th, 2005. Kojima is the one who ends his legendary Triple Crown reign and becomes basically, essentially, the ace of the company. Because at the,
Yeah.
like at the end of that match, like I watched it recently, he's, Kawada's like, putting him over, like, putting the belts on him and everything. And it's like, it's obvious that like he's had his run with these titles and like he's satisfied. And also this is kind of like his like departure from the company as a full timer. He signs a contract with Dream Stage Entertainment, the parent company of Pride Fighting Championships at the time, and he joins Hustle. And I'll be honest with you, Dylan, like this era of Kawada's career is basically a blind spot for me because I fucking hate Hustle, and I make no apologies for that. It's not for me. I know a lot of people who I respect like it. That's fine. I understand why. It's not for me, and I never really got into this. I mean, this is like the era of like Kawada doing gimmicky shit and doing karaoke, and surprisingly, like I'm glad I found out that he's actually got a very lovely voice in terms of singing and stuff like that. But I have no interest in ever watching any of this stuff. So we're gonna kind of just skip over this, and we're gonna go to.
Well, let me just say one thing on that. A lot of people don't know that the guy from Dream Stage and Pride, he was after the split with Noah and All Japan. He was at those shows. Like he had already had his eye on Kawada all the way back to 2000. And when Kawada did that, he said that he had, and I don't know if this is true or not, but he came out in an interview and said that he was a freelancer for All Japan. He never had a signed contract for those years. So I thought that was very interesting when I was reading about that he had not signed a contract for All Japan through those years. But it really made sense. Like that title reign was amazing to see him finally get it and shake off that reputation as the secondary guy. And he was so important to put over Kojima and made him a great star in his own right. And Kawada deserves a lot of credit for that. Kojima had it right away. When he went to All Japan, he felt like a top star. And obviously, we love his work. I think everybody is really impressed by him. But he was elevated to such great heights due to Kawada and that booking. So, as much as I don't like Muto, I have to give him credit because a lot of people thought when that happened, they thought that Kawada was going to be on the hot seat. Like he was going to be the one to go. But actually, that story, if that's true about him not having a contract, makes a lot of sense. Why Muto would book him so well, so he wouldn't leave and jump. I think that actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. But Hustle, the only thing I'll say about that is. He's a great singer. I will say that. His gimmick in Hustle was kind of like a Bruce Lee wannabe. Like I don't know how they came to this attire. I guess the only thing I can imagine is Takada was like, "Oh, black and yellow. I know someone else who's known for those colors," and they just put him in, gave Kawada that gimmick for some reason. But yeah, it was just Hustle was a crazy, crazy promotion when you think about it. He had matches against Razor Ramon Hard Gay in there, Yinling the erotic terrorist. It was quite. I had a huge crush on Yinling when I was like first getting into Japanese wrestling. I was like, what is this company, Hustle? But I did have a crush on her. But when I watched the whole show, I was just thinking, like, this company's insane. How did Kawada end up here? But I think it actually worked twofold for him, even though we're going to move forward a little bit. Because he did have the matches and the outside promotions every now and then, like New Japan and Noah. But mostly it allowed him to protect his body to where he didn't have to, because in Hustle he's not having All Japan Classics. like let's just be honest. And it let him make a lot of money, most importantly by Dream Stage. So but it was really a win-win for Kawada, because if you're a fan, like you said, I think a lot of people that are fans of his and want to see him against Misawa and Noah, or he was in the G1 that year, if you're a fan of his, you don't care what's going on in Hustle with Kawada. You just don't have to watch that crap at the end of the day. But I do think that there is a certain appeal to see this guy, this specific person, Kawada, in Hustle. I do think that there is a crazy, ridiculous appeal in seeing him. And his gimmick too, his side gimmick, was that he always beat up Taichi. That was literally his gimmick, no matter what.
That's the good part. That was a good part of his run in Hustle. Right?
Yes,
so.
that was literally his entire gimmick. Every show he would beat up Taichi in either a video package or at the show itself. There was a crazy show on Christmas that year, I think 2005, when Taichi was trying to, and Taichi at this time too, if you know him now, he looks so much different back then. He had all black hair, short black hair, and a mustache. Like, he looked ridiculous. And he cut this promo where he was like, "I'm sick today, I don't want to fight." And Kawada was like, "Get your ass in the ring." And Taichi was like, "Okay." And then he just killed him with a power bomb. It was so entertaining. WH, watch that match. Taichi versus Kawada. I promise you, you will love it. It was
All right.
complete squash, and you can see Taichi getting obliterated.
It'll be my only Kawada hustle match that I'll watch. I'll watch it right after we finish this. I do want to kind of just like kind of run through his post All Japan career here really quickly, as we're kind of like running along on the showtime here. But just kind of go through the highlights. July 18th, 2005. At the Tokyo Dome, Kawada wrestles one final match against Mitsuharu Misawa on Noah's big Tokyo Dome show for that year, and Misawa goes over and yeah, I mean there's a lot you can talk about, I suppose. Like I don't think there's, it's another match, and like Misawa booked it, so like of course he was gonna go over. Kawada defeats Shinsuke Nakamura at joint.
One thing I will say about the Misawa match, which is very important. That was his only match at Noah until after Misawa died, because he cut a promo afterwards that he wasn't supposed to, because they had a primetime slot, and that's very, very rare in Japan for wrestling, and he went overtime cutting him. And like everybody thought at the time, if you go back and look at some of the stuff on him, that he shot at Misawa. It was like, fuck you, or something like that. But actually, he just said, hey, I hope we can have another match again, and I really respect you, blah, blah, blah. Typical wrestling promo. But he went long, and Misawa got super pissed and promised that he would never wrestle in Noah again, although obviously that didn't happen after he died. But that was kind of an interesting thing. It's like they finally got to have this match, and then immediately they're heated again. It's like they're pissed off at each other again.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like typical, I suppose, between those two guys. So yeah, he defeats Shinsuke Nakamura at the All Japan New Japan joint Wrestle Kingdom Super Show on January 4th, 2007. He goes to the 2000 final Champion Carnival finals against Keiji, which in a match which he loses. He pins Keiji in what would be his final All Japan match on April 9th, 2008 in that year's Champion Carnival tournament match. From there, he just works everywhere, Dylan. He works for Hustle, 0-1, New Japan. He works in the 2008 G1 Climax. He works in Noah, like after Misawa's death. Like he's brought in to be in the Global League and try to, do some stuff with like the younger guys who would have been like kind of like the young boys in the All Japan Dojo when they were all still in All Japan together. And then on August 15th, he participated in basically the last recorded in-ring match that he has. It's the last card of the G1 Climax of that year. He teams with Tenryu and Tiger Mask, and they take on the team of Riki Choshu, Junji Hirata, and Akira Nagami. A match that Kawada's team wins, and he hasn't wrestled since. From there, he's opened a small ramen shop called Men Jarasuke in the Setagaya area of the Tokyo Prefecture. I was almost going to go there with John Pollock a year ago, Dylan, but the thing was, it's like it was really far from where our hotel was, and we were not confident that we would have had a good meal there. So it gets mixed reviews, this restaurant. So we were like, we'll just stay in Tokyo. We're going to go to Tsurubashi because we know, and Jojo Remy and his wife Christine took us to a really excellent restaurant. We got some really great ramen, so I can't really complain too much about it. But that's my wrap up of Toshiaki Kawada. Before we get to you, Dylan, I'm going to let you have the last word. I just wanted to talk about his championship accomplishments. He's won the Triple Crown 5 times. He's been the World Tag Team Champion 9 different times with different partners. He's won the Real World Tag League 3 times. He's won the Champion Carnival twice, and he has been the 0-1 heavyweight champion. I think it's the AWA world title belt that they were using at this time. He's been that champion 1 time.
And that was the tail end of his career. That was in 2010. And if you go back and watch that match, he had matches against like Daisuke Sekimoto, and he was still good. He wasn't the Kawada of like the 90s or anything. Nobody would even admit that. But compared to Kobashi, Misawa, and Taue, he was way closer to himself than those guys were at the end. So I always think that's kind of amazing. And maybe that hustle run had something to do with it. He was able to save himself a little bit more because he was in a lot better health by the end and doing good things with the ramen restaurant now. But you are not a fan. You've heard negative things. You've heard mixed reviews. I can't comment.
I wish I could have gone, like, just myself at some point, but like I wasn't like, it was like it was like John's last night in Tokyo, and I wanted to have really guaranteed good, ramen experience. So we went to a place that we knew was going to be really, really good.
Yeah, I understand. Shout out to John Pollock there. You have to take care of him in Japan, so I appreciate that. One thing I will say before I get to my final spiel here, how do you feel? The one thing we can say about his post career, like 2005 on, how does it make you feel that under Inoki's watch in the G1, Kendo Kashin got a singles win over Kawada?
It's like people would say to me, Inokiism was actually good. Fuck off. It was never good. This is one minor example of why. Okay, like Kendo Kashin has a singles win over Toshiaki Kawada. Go fuck yourself if you think that that's a good idea.
It was a weird era in 2005 for sure, but Kawada played his part, and I mean, to me, as I said, I really appreciate his overall character arc in terms of never being the ace himself, and arguably being as deserving or even more deserving, if you want to say, than the guy who was in his, he was in his shadow of in Misawa. I think that's such a very relatable storyline because I think everybody feels like there's been a time here or there, maybe often, maybe not, but everybody I think has a time where it's like they feel like they deserve something and somebody else got it, or somebody else stepped in front of them that they didn't deserve it. I felt those feelings many times. I felt those feelings of coming short many times, but it made his eventual wins that much better. Like his title win that he had over Misawa is a legendary moment in my opinion, even though the match wasn't as great as some of his other ones. That stands out to me just as much because of that. His long title reign means so much more because of all the failed title reigns he had before. It's like without the bitter, the sweet isn't as sweet. And Kawada was just so amazing as a worker. I couldn't put him over any more than we already have. But every now and again he'll show up to shows like for All Japan, or he's on a talk battle. He did one with Tenryu, and Tenryu was like, "Hey, are you gonna come back for a match?" And Kawada was like, "Probably not, but if I did, I'd like to wrestle you." And but Tenryu retired, obviously. And then he had one with Marufuji. I think that was on his own. He had like this one produce show that he had, the Holy War show, kind of like the Fortune Dream, but for him. And on it, I think him and Marufuji had a talk battle, and I always remember that. It was very funny to me because Marufuji was like, we don't even know each other that well. Like, we really didn't cross paths that much, but here I am on your show.
Like, I mean, like, yeah, Marufuji was, like seconded to Misawa, and like, Misawa kind of kept his dudes away from Kawada. It sounds like based on that talk battle, but
yeah, Kawada had Misawa in a way.
Yeah, well, you can't always. Yeah. Anyways, I don't want to talk about Misawa in a way. Kawada show too much.
Yeah, but the thing is, Kawada and the show, like that, they are so interconnected. Even then, they asked him about it. He was like, his passion for wrestling really went down after Misawa died, which I think is interesting because of their amazing like love and a lot of times hate rivalry. Like their grudge against each other and their real life rivalry. But in the end, it's like he still loved and respected Misawa in his own way. So I think that's kind of a great point to make on their whole feud and rivalry, is that at the end that still took a toll out of him. But yeah, every time he comes back, everyone asks him if he'll come back to wrestle again. But he's like 57 now. I don't know if that's going to happen again, to be honest. It seems like he's happy running the restaurant, so good for him to get out of wrestling without being broken down. He's not in a wheelchair. He's not, in terrible shape or even dead like Misawa. Like, he is in relatively good health despite everything he went through. So I think that's a hell of a successful career all in all. You say what you want about the titles or Misawa being over him, but at the end of the day, he had a crazy successful career on his own and is a legend in his own right up there with every one of the four pillars.
Definitely. I mean, I can't say anything different from what you, or add to what you just said there, Dylan. I will say, like, I think he has I think you made this point as well. Like, he has a very underrated end of his career, like working like, with the 0-1 heavyweight title. And like, if you look at his career in its entirety, like, it's an amazing career. And there's so many great matches that he has been part of, that he's helped produce. And it's just one of those people that, like, I always, gravitated towards Kawada more than I did to Misawa, and 20 years, 25 years later, it still holds true for me. And yeah, like, that's it. Like, go out. There's tons of Kawada stuff out there if you want to watch. I mean, I could give you like, and if we had another hour, I could give you match recommendations.
We could go for 20 hours, literally. I think, like, if we went through all of his great matches, we could have like a full day's worth. Like that show they did, the 24-hour show. I think we could do that just on Four Pillars matches if we had
just
that
for Kawada.
time.
basically
just
as
for
well.
Kawada, really. Yeah.
So, so I want to thank you, Dylan. Thank you so much for joining me on this this really great retrospective on Toshiaki Kawada. I think we did a great job, and thank you so much for just adding so much details to like from his book and stuff like that. And I think hopefully the listeners got a lot out of this. Like if you knew some stuff about Kawada, you learned something. I'm really happy if that happened. If you never heard of Kawada, you're just listening to this out of the blue, I hope you go out, search Toshiaki Kawada's like matches that are out there in the internet, on the ether, as it were, and I hope you gain an appreciation that matches maybe mine and Dylan's for Dangerous K.
Absolutely. Hopefully everybody enjoyed it, and hopefully everybody learned a little bit. And you've got a ton of great matches to watch now. If you haven't seen them before, please check them out. And if you know them already, you already know I'm telling the truth. There were no lies told on this show about how great he is and how amazing he was. So hopefully everybody out there enjoyed it. And thank you so much for having me on WH. I absolutely love doing the show about one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. And just anytime we get to sit down, it's a lot of fun. So I'm so thankful that I was on the show. I was on the retrospective on Liger and his match without Samurai, and now I'm back with this. Whatever you do later on, I cannot wait to be on it. More projects and back and forth, because I love hanging out with you and talking with you. And thank you to everyone listening. We really appreciate all the support post Pro Res, and also my show, The Eastern Lariat. If you want to watch that or listen to that, you can. We have a Patreon. Check that out as well. There's lots of cool stuff on there. Every week we're doing shows about Japanese wrestling. But I love going back in time and talking about these shows and these matches from the 90s. They mean so much to me personally, and I know they do to you too, WH. So I'm so happy that we could spread this love to everybody out there.
Yeah, definitely. I want people to go out and check the 90s project that Dylan does. He recounts every year of the 90s, like every promotion, America, Mexico, Japan. He covers it all in looking at the best matches from each year. And he does a great like final show with your partner, Fredo Spreza, right, from Lucha Talk. I always enjoy those shows as well when you recap like the top 10 matches of each year. So definitely check that out over at the Eastern Lariat Patreon. I'm a member of that, and I'm proud supporter of Dylan and the work he's doing with Striga over at the Eastern Lariat. On behalf of Dylan, I want to say thank you to all the listeners, and thank you to all the people who've been supporting and very complimentary about the long and winding Royal Road. And we'll be back a month later with a match review. And I don't know who's going to be on that. I don't know what match we're going to talk about, but there you go. But in the future, episode 12 will be our look back at one Kenta Kobashi. So keep an eye out that in a future episode of the long and winding Road. And until then, I will say goodbye.